The slender girl burst into the hospitably open doors like a whirlwind. Having missed the greeting, the guest said to the hostess, who, in terms of the impressiveness of her figure, was in no way inferior. I dressed quickly. The screening will start in half an hour, but we still need to get there, bellowed Sandy. What are you doing? What other viewing? Where to go? The guest was almost jumping up and down with impatience. She was actively gesticulating, as if trying to give her friend the necessary acceleration, and sarcastically asked, "What viewing? Couldn't you have asked anything smarter?" "Well, not culinary dance. There is less and less time left." "Why are you so nerdy?" "You don't look too fresh today." The hostess sighed and tried to explain the reason for her fatigue, and Sandy politely refused to participate in the dinner. "To be honest, I'd rather rest at home. Something is not going to improve my grandmother's health. In the morning, my blood pressure went through the roof beyond all the indicators in my memory. Even an ambulance had to be called. Just recently, the therapist came and wrote a bunch of tests that need to be taken to the mobile laboratory tomorrow. I'll call Grandma so that I don't have to go to the clinic." "So, Sandy, let me wish you good luck and keep my fingers crossed for you." The guest twisted her head, showing that she was thinking about her interlocutor. "Why, Victoria, do you want to set me up? I sent a video of our pair performance to the preliminary selection after I received a message that I liked the dance. I submitted an official application for participation in the dance duet section. A duet is two people. If I suddenly appear on stage alone, then maybe the jury won't look at my number. Urgently looking for a partner is also a dubious undertaking." Thread did not hold back her indignation and directly asked her friend, "Shouldn't you have asked me if I wanted to perform and fight with my opponents for unknown reasons?" Seeing that Victoria did not give in to flattery, Sandy changed her tone. "Victoria, please, 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 please. I don't ask you for anything very often. You will carry out our signature program perfectly, even if you are woken up in the middle of the night. You and I have the perfect team. I simply cannot find another such talented partner, even if I search for several years. Moreover, we have a little more than an hour before the start of the screening." Hearing the girls' voices, an elderly woman came out of the room and greeted the guest. "Sandy, good afternoon." "Hello, Irene." Victoria perked up. "Grace. Grandma, what happened? You feel bad?" The woman shook her head. "Everything's fine." "Victoria, did you hear that? The doctor said that we need to move little by little if the pressure is more or less within the normal range. I'll go to the kitchen now and put some tea on." The guest decided to influence her friend's grandmother. "How are you feeling? Maybe I should run for some medicine while Victoria gets ready." Conscience smiles. "There is no need to run anywhere for medicine. I have everything I need. Sorry, girls, but I accidentally heard snippets of your conversation but didn't listen. So you better answer. Where do you suddenly need to take Victoria out so urgently?" Sandy's voice sounded pitiful, almost in tears. "Naughty to watch a dance competition. For me, it's practically a matter of life and death." Victoria. The woman looked carefully at Sandy, who folded her hands in a pleading gesture, turned her gaze to her granddaughter, and, looking into her eyes, asked, "No, son, perhaps it would be better for you to rest. I completely tortured you. So, girls, let's go have some tea. Surely this will not be the last competition that will be." Sandy knew very well that it was useless to argue with her friend's grandmother. The girl obediently kicked off her shoes and headed to the bathroom to wash her hands. However, whipping the fragrant foam in her palms, the girl did not stop coming up with arguments that would still help force her friend to join her at the competition. Seating decorously at her long-established place at the table in her best friend's house, Sandy again turned to her grandmother. "You see, this competition is not the most ordinary and passable. Winning it will be a chance to completely change your life. Understand that although the competition is regional, the winners will get a ticket to the capital. To be honest, I understand that at the qualifying stage, you need to shine so much in order to distinguish yourself from the crowd of talents. And then training will begin, and during it, it will be possible to polish the movement almost to ideal. The main thing for me is to pass the first round, but without help, it will be much more problematic. Moreover, I submitted an application for a duet performance. I confess I didn't consult her. It's my mistake, I admit, but I acted with the best intentions. Yes, at least you could ask my opinion on the phone. You and I are constantly in touch, and you haven't even hinted even once. feeling that her friend was not angry and was only grumbling because she was a little vulnerable with her unauthorized decision to participate in the competition. Sandy continued her persuasion. "Willing understand, Victoria will not lose anything if she goes to this viewing for pleasure. If he doesn't get excited about the idea and doesn't want to compete anymore, then he may not continue to participate in the project. I promise that after successfully passing the qualifying round, I will not insist on anything. I'm ready to swear on anything. I just wish I could pass the selection. Please let her come with me. Look, she already looks better." A blush appeared on my cheeks after tea. Assistant Sandy knew how to persuade. Victoria trembled and, looking at her grandmother, asked, "Are you really feeling well, or are you just trying to calm me down?" The woman smiled. "I'm actually fine. Go, my soul. It's time to unwind." Sandy clapped her hands and ran up to hug her friend's grandmother. "May, thank you. You are super. The coolest grandma in the world." The woman smiled. And while her granddaughter was getting ready, began asking the guest about the well-being of her family. Soon Victoria announced to her friend that she was ready, and the girls headed to the casting. They decided not to spend money on a taxi. On the way to the venue of the competition, Victoria involuntarily thought that, no matter how you look at it, it couldn't have happened any other way. After all, how could she refuse her best friend, with whom she has shared joys and problems in half for more than half of her life? The girls met at a children's sports camp. They were in different squads and hardly communicated, but after going through a funny situation, they became best friends. It was the passion for dancing that first became the reason for intense competition, and later brought them closer in terms of wealth. The girls' parents were at about the same level and could afford to pay for an expensive hobby. Victoria and Sandy trained in prestigious choreographic studios in the city, but in different areas, and went to training with sincere pleasure. During their summer vacation, both girls missed their favorite activity. So when the camp announced a talent competition, they decided to participate. Of course, each of them was preparing to perform a dance number. The camp management provided a place for training to everyone, of whom, however, there were not very many. The time when a separate one-story building with a hall and a stage was opened was limited, so inevitably the participants knew quite well what their rivals would focus. It cannot be said that Sandy trained in her choreographic studio somehow, but she jealously noted that when performing some elements she was far from Victoria. In addition, the opponent trained with complete dedication. Even outside of rehearsals, Victoria was lost in her thoughts. She walked along the paths for a long time, then stopped, wrote something down in a small notebook and moved on. No matter how hard Sandy tried, she couldn't see what Victoria was recording. The day of the competition came very quickly. There was literally no empty space in the hall. After all, to be honest, there wasn't that much entertainment in the camp. According to the draw, Victoria got to perform immediately after the magician, who opened the parade of talents. Having entered the stage, the girl brilliantly began her performance to a song well known to everyone. However, as soon as the first lines of the second verse were heard from the speakers, the music stopped and silence fell in the hall. But the girl on stage acted as if nothing had happened and continued her dance. Just as before, she managed to look into the hall in such a way that it seemed that she was looking into the soul of every viewer. Victoria's lips moved slightly. Apparently, she still hummed the song quietly, helping herself not to get lost in the dance. It was fantastically beautiful. The silence was suddenly broken by a lonely voice coming from somewhere in the back rows singing popular lines out loud. Then other spectators joined the unknown soloist. Soon, almost the entire room, including not only teenagers, but also a significant part of the staff, picked up the familiar lines. One of the contestants, standing behind the scenes with a guitar, began to play a melody on the instrument while waiting for his entrance. Having spoken, Victoria made several deep curtsies to each side of the hall, as if the crowned person's name were there, and also to the author's unexpected company behind the scenes. Smiling, she blew kisses to everyone, and at that moment there was As a result, the first prize was awarded to Victoria. The silver medal was won by a young man who played the guitar perfectly and won many hearts. An honorable third place went to Sandy. She didn't show that she was upset. I found the strength to congratulate those who beat her and thank the jury and the audience. That evening, after lights out, Sandy came to Victoria's house and called her to talk. The winner did not refuse. At Sandy's suggestion, they went to the dining room so that, according to her, nosy neighbors could not overhear them. and sat down on a bench. Her silence dragged on, and Victoria asked, "Ma'am, well, what did you want?" "Speak quickly, otherwise I'll fall right off my feet from fatigue." "In general, I just wanted to admire your performance. You're great, just super." She handled the unusual situation well, didn't get confused, and danced without a hitch. Victoria was pleased by the praise from a peer who knew about dancing, and she admitted it. "Actually, this merit is not entirely mine. A coach once told us that at competitions of any level, you need to be prepared for anything." She gave an example of how one day at the World Figure Skating Championships in the early 70s, one of the couples competing for the Soviet Union found itself in a terrible situation. The musical accompaniment was simply turned off during the program. However, the Soviet skaters, cutting the ice with their skates creakingly, continued to perform the elements as if nothing had happened. The secret was that, at the insistence of their coach, they practiced differently. The entire dance pattern, or I don't remember exactly what they call the sequence of elements, was subject to a strict rhythm calculated in seconds. And the lack of music in the middle of the performance was not a disaster. It was, of course, much more difficult for them than it is for me today. Can you imagine the difference in the scale of the competition? Besides, no one sang along with them. Today I had this inspiring example in my memory, and their incredible support from the audience was felt. Sandy was delighted. When I called my rival to a meeting, I initially just wanted to find out her secret. Now I decided to become her friend. Victoria accepted the offer to communicate. They exchanged what they knew, and even came up with several dance routines to perform at Parents' Day. The girls came up with a small number and received a storm of applause. Upon returning to the city, the friends continued to communicate. Sandy even moved to the studio where Victoria trained. As they grew older, slender, young, excellent dancing beauties invariably attracted attention at discos. The girls entered the Institute of Culture together and managed to finish their studies. When Victoria's happy, calm life collapsed overnight. Her parents died in the family car. As soon as they drove a little away from the parking lot at the shopping center, the car flew into the air. The doctors were powerless to do anything. The only thing that saved the girl was that she didn't feel very well that day and stayed at home and didn't go shopping with her parents. She lay on the sofa under a warm blanket and drank tea with lemon, trying to quickly overcome her illness. Seeing her grandmother in front of her, who opened the door of her dead daughter's apartment with her key, Victoria realized that something irreparable had happened. She hugged her granddaughter and whispered the news in her ear. The girl could not find a place for herself. It seemed to her that if she had gone with her parents, she would certainly have noticed something was wrong and prevented the death of her loved ones. She tried not to upset her grandmother, but sometimes tears would fall from her eyes as soon as anything reminded her of her parents. During that terrible period, Sandy became a real support for Victoria. She literally moved into the apartment where her friend Sandy moved after the tragedy and did not allow her to leave in grief. She lived there, almost forcibly took her to college, forced her to at least eat something. To the surprise of many neighbors, the perpetrator involved in the massacre of Victoria's parents was detained. Moreover, the main merit did not belong to law enforcement agencies who, as if someone had issued a directive not to be too active in the search for the criminal. The grandmother spared no expense in ensuring that not only the murderer, but also the person who ordered the massacre of her only adored daughter and son-in-law, whom she, contrary to popular folklore, respected and loved, was punished. Eileen sold her jewelry and diligently protected her granddaughter from the details of the investigation and legal vicissitudes. She seriously feared for Victoria because her psychological state, even 6 months after the tragedy, was deplorable. As soon as the girl approached the house where the apartment was located, where she lived with her parents, she began to become hysterical. Victoria could not forgive herself for being alive. The girl flatly refused to return to where she was once happy. Irene didn't insist. It was not easy for her herself, but alone she would probably have simply lost her mind. Her granddaughter and punishing criminals became her anchor for maintaining her sanity, but Victoria held on partly because of her grandmother. And with the help of Sandy, she tried to continue living in a new reality. The financial situation has noticeably deteriorated, and Irene, after much deliberation, arranged a home council with her granddaughter's girl. I understand that we have a difficult conversation ahead, but I won't make important decisions without you. I know that they don't throw away apartments, but I honestly feel sorry for renting them out. I'm afraid that instead of money, we will end up with devastation. How do you think? Grandma, you're right. It's too hard for me to be there afterwards. I still can't find a normal job, and I'm already ashamed to sit on your neck. The woman hugged her granddaughter tightly, glad that she did not cry. During a short but emotionally difficult conversation, the whirlwind with the sale of my daughter's apartment began. Throughout all the tragic, difficult days, when the woman was wandering around the city trying to get justice and resolving other issues, Sandy supported her friend. She even tried to drag Victoria to all sorts of entertainment events. It was no use. However, Victoria knew that Sandy met some guy at one of the discos where she couldn't get her out. And now, having made sure that her friend was in relatively normal condition, she spent all her free time with him. Victoria felt offended that Sandy seemed to be hiding her boyfriend from her, but she understood everything after another serious conversation with her grandmother. Somehow she spoke. "My girl, I know that you very suddenly had to grow up, but that's how fate decreed it. In general, this is not what I wanted to talk about now. The fact that you start seeing each other less is inevitable. One day this was bound to happen. You can't be close to her everywhere, otherwise it's something abnormal. Don't be offended that she doesn't introduce you to her boyfriend. This is quite easily explained. That's the way the world works, is that love is always placed above friendship," and Victoria objected indignantly. "So I'm not going to take Sandy's boyfriend away." My mother smiles. "I didn't think so. Sandy probably doesn't suspect you of any bad intentions either. However, she instinctively tries to spend more time with the guy and doesn't interfere with you in her meetings so as not to scatter his attention. And are flighty people. Not all, of course, but alas, very many. So I also want you not to be offended in vain and not to be too trusting. I didn't tell you, but you have the right to know. Your parents, as it turned out, were dealt with by people whom they considered good friends. Just remember that you can only trust yourself completely, unconditionally, and completely. Must be especially careful when you love. Happiness appreciates silence. The less you brag." Victoria nodded, listening to her grandmother. Everything fell into place. The resentment against my friend evaporated like raindrops from hot asphalt. Victoria really carefully remembered all the words of her only loved one. The girl always admired her grandmother, and now she was a little ashamed that she had left her beloved relative unattended. Of course, now having almost reached the desired stop, it was stupid to turn back. All that remains is to perfectly fulfill your friend's request and return home quickly. Scraps of triumphant, sad, and instructive memories managed to flash through Victoria's head while they were on their way to the casting. Even before arriving at the place, the girls' thoughts were interrupted by Sandy's enthusiastic monologue, which was anticipating success. "Very soon we will receive our diplomas, and then, hello, new life in the capital. The prospects will be better than in our dense city." Victoria thought that she was already accustomed to the ambitions and spontaneous actions of her best friend, but Sandy managed to surprise her, and she objected to the good name of her small homeland. Something happened that had never happened in many years of friendship. Sandy was embarrassed, and in order not to respond to the statement, abruptly turned the conversation to the details of the upcoming performance. As we approached the venue of the competition, Victoria began to feel more and more apprehensive. Judging by the fact that the line to the old building, which was once a cinema, stretched like a thin snake for almost half of the long stop, two things became obvious. First, the competition looked set to be tough. Secondly, the casting was not organized in the best way. However, after the girls stood for about an hour among the same people who wanted to become famous in the field of dance, the line suddenly began to move much faster. When Sandy and Victoria finally got their moment to perform, the reason for the sudden acceleration became clear. They barely had time to perform a couple of movements when the man sitting in the center of the table with the jury shouted, "Great, just bravo, enough. Wait in the next room, we need to discuss the concept for the further development of the duet. There is water, tea, healthy sweets. Rest a little later and you will be invited for an interview." Victoria didn't care because at the insistence of her stubborn friend, she only agreed to participate at the very initial stage. But Sandy's hands were almost shaking. She was afraid to hear that the project did not need a dance duet. Victoria, feeling Sandy's excitement, quietly whispered, "It seems I have completed my mission. Now I can say that I refuse to further participate in the competition, so as not to take the place of girls who dream of getting into the project." Sandy's heart was relieved, and she entered the impromptu waiting room in a great mood, provided by the support of her best friend. Previously, when the building was, as planned during construction, a cinema, there was a cafe here. So, in a fairly spacious room where there were already about 15 lucky people, Sandy and Victoria easily found a place for themselves. The situation was nervous. A pretty brown-haired middle-aged woman, who was in charge of the distribution of provisions and kept order, smiled sweetly at the contestants, poured tea and water, offered sweets and something that looked like homemade marshmallows. Listenanimix, Victoria refused any treats. But Sandy, having politely thanked Zlata, as it was written on her jacket, decided to enjoy sweets and tea. Taking a sip of her drink, she whispered to her friend, "Why are you ashamed? The same Zlata is here, it seems to me, for a reason." He probably looks closely and gradually observes which of the contestants has what character. Anyone who is rude to her will obviously not make it past the qualifying round. Again, look how closely she looks at everyone, especially if there are girls in a group. In dance groups, you yourself understand, like astronauts, psychological compatibility is important. So she notices which group is more promising to Victoria. But you, Sandy, you are simply an unsurpassed strategist. Underspin smiles. It is what it is. You just can't imagine how much I want to break free from here to the capital. Parents constantly name. Don't stay out late. Eat well, otherwise it's almost transparent, she mimicked. Victoria remained silent so as not to cry. She would be glad for her mom and dad to tell her something. She missed those times when the whole family was together. Fortunately, the painful conversation for Victoria was interrupted. A friend from the choreographic studio approached the girlfriends, and they chatted a little, remembering the past. The conversation helped me forget a little about the tense situation. The number of contestants in the hall did not decrease, and new ones came to replace those who went into the room for an interview. Soon they invited an old friend of Sandy and Victoria for an interview, and the next two were called into the room. In the room, lounging on the sofa, half lying, half sitting, was a man who from the first moment made the most unpleasant impression on Victoria. Mannered and haughtily, although looking up at the girls, he slightly stretching out his vowels. "I'm the producer of this project. To be honest, I watched on the online camera how you move, and it is impressive. You have an excellent duet, such coherence, such harmony, and such plasticity. You seem to move without tension. It's obvious that it's a thrill to get away from a performance, and this is very much appreciated. Just in general, I'm ready to make you a unique offer right now. I'm hiring you at a club in the capital. At first, of course, there will be a probationary period, but all the tips are yours. Of course, you will need to learn a little. Our establishment has its own specifics, but I think girls, you are talented, capable, and can handle it easily." Victoria couldn't contain her surprise. Sandy, who already had a picture of her being applauded in a huge Capitol hall before her eyes, suddenly also thought about her friend's quite reasonable question. Anton laughed nervously and explained, focusing on the age of the contestants. "It seems like minors were not allowed to attend our casting. So where did such naivety suddenly come from? Or did you decide to put on a comedy here? You will have to dance in a club. The visitors, they're generous and excited." The producer did not name the work what it most likely actually was. But Victoria realized that she had to leave this room as quickly as possible. Taking Sandy by the arm, the girl politely said goodbye. "Sorry to take up your time, but we have to go." Contrary to fears, neither Anton nor anyone else restrained the girls. They calmly walked out of the former cinema building onto the street. The always cheerful Sandy sank, realizing that she almost got into trouble, and Victoria encouraged her. "Well, don't worry, there will still be normal castings. In the meantime, let's catch a taxi. I'm very worried about my grandmother." Sandy, who felt awkward, was inconvenient to refuse, although she planned to go on an extraordinary shopping spree to improve her mood. While the girls were riding in a taxi, Victoria asked, "Let's not scare my grandmother with the truth about this false casting. Let's just say it didn't work out. This is true in reality. She doesn't need to know the details." Of course, the friend immediately agreed. "I myself hate to think that they could deceive me so easily. I could check this company and the organizer." "Okay, now I'll be smarter. Thank you, Victoria, for coming with me." Victoria smiled at her friend, although, to be honest, she felt bad in her heart. For the sake of this exchange competition, she left her grandmother alone. And I would never forgive myself if something bad happened during this time. To the girls' great relief, everything was relatively fine with Irene. However, the woman promised her granddaughter that she would undergo a full examination in the near future. "Don't worry, I'll go through all the doctors." At the local clinic, the queue to see a cardiologist was scheduled 3 months in advance. The neurologist was on vacation. There was no endocrinologist at all. In fact, only therapists and specialists. An ophthalmologist and a gynecologist worked. Victoria smiled sadly, remembering Sandy's passage about her hometown, and mentally partly agreed with her. Yes, a millionaire, a clinic in the city center with almost no doctors. Late at the insistence of her granddaughter, Irene went to a private paid clinic. After all, Victoria was adamant. "Let's withdraw the money left from the sale of the apartment from the account, but you will see the doctors without such a long wait." The woman could only obey, and her epic began with visiting the clinic, taking tests, and undergoing examinations. Victoria, of course, asked her grandmother about the results, but in the bustle before graduation, she simply did not have time to study what was indicated. Irene cheerfully reported to her granddaughter that all the identified deviations from the norm were simply senile changes, which aroused Victoria's indignation. "Nonsense. You are always young to me." In fact, Irene's health was not as rosy as she presented it to her granddaughter. In addition to the diagnosed diabetes mellitus, the cardiologist was concerned about the condition of her heart. The intelligent woman did not panic and checked the diagnosis in another place, and then in another clinic. But all the doctors were unanimous. The condition was dangerous, and it was necessary to prepare for surgery. She diligently followed all the recommendations, and Victoria happily noted that the feverish blush had disappeared from her grandmother's cheeks. Late need for when underwent surgery, and it seemed that a new happy period of life was beginning ahead. Having received their diplomas, Victoria and Sandy decided to open their own choreographic studio, where not only children but also adults who decided to join dancing could come. The girls relied on an unusual approach. They offered visitors a mix of modern dances, and also began choreographing couples' movements to wedding compositions, using an idea from a movie they had once seen. In addition, Victoria decided that in her free time she would sew, learning from her grandmother's experience. Otherwise, promoting a studio from the very beginning is not the fastest thing. Surprisingly, needlework captivated the girl, helping her take her mind off her troubles. Moreover, Irene turned out to be a patient and knowledgeable teacher and happily shared with her granddaughter all the wisdom that she knew a great deal. Just a few months later, justifying the wildest hopes of the housewives, the studio began to enjoy success. Of course, there was still no talk of net profit, but still the idea turned out to be successful. Victoria was happy that she was doing what she loved, both at home and in the company of a friend. Most of all, the girl's soul was warmed by the thought that her grandmother no longer had to finance their small family alone. Everything was fine for almost a year, and then my grandmother suddenly passed away. The girl returned home and saw that her grandmother was lying on the sofa, as if resting. She slowly went over to cover her with a blanket because it was quite cool in the apartment since the central heating had already been turned off and, as usual, frost had returned. As soon as the girl came closer, a cry of horror escaped, it seemed, from the very depths of her soul. It was obvious that her grandmother could no longer escape the cold. The unrest that she experienced turned out to be fatal for the woman, feeling the turmoil saying goodbye to her only relative. Victoria found her outlet in the studio, lost herself in the movements, and carefully watching the dancers, the girl drove away her pain. For Sandy, for whom everything seemed to be fine, tried not to sparkle with happy eyes so as not to irritate her friend, and came to visit her less and less. Victoria was not offended. Who wants to communicate with a sad person? She was disgusted with herself, spending a long time sorting through fabrics, of which her grandmother had accumulated quite a lot. The girl seemed to be talking with her beloved relative, and it seemed that this was the only way she could, if not forget about the mental pain, then at least reduce it. One evening, having lost track of time, the girl completely forgot about the safety rules. Hearing the doorbell ring, for some reason she immediately decided that Sandy, whom she had not even seen today, had come running in. A friend warned me that she would not be able to teach classes due to personal matters and probably dropped in to tell me something. This was a result. Victoria, without looking through the peephole, opened the doors and retreated when she saw an unfamiliar middle-aged man on the threshold with a box of cake in his hands. The girl muttered, "You must have made a mistake," and began to close the doors. However, the man did not allow her to do this and surprised her with an unexpected revelation. Hello, Victoria. What an adult you are, and you won't even recognize it. Well, I'm not proud. I'll introduce myself. My name is Michael. I am your dear grandfather." The girl grinned unkindly, remembering what her mother told her. "Much more, dear. He left his grandmother when your common daughter went to school. And as far as I know from my mother, I visited a couple of times at most. So all the best to you and goodbye." The man put his foot on the threshold so that Victoria, even if she wanted, could not slam the door in front of him, as she intended, and in a stern tone, which sent shivers down the back of the not timid girl, he said, "Granddaughter, don't get excited. Part of the apartment partially belongs to me." She most likely did not bother with this formality, the proud girl. "So, dear granddaughter, excuse me, move over and let me pass." Stunned, Victoria, using all her strength, managed to throw on the door chain and shouted to the visitor, "I'll call the police now, so you know." Mayan just grinned. "Yes, call as much as you like. It's even better that you make sure that I'm telling the truth. I'll also tell you that my granddaughter is the only one who won't let me in the door. I have a signature cake from the city of my childhood. Surely the police will like it." The man removed his leg. Victoria, slamming the door, locked it and froze in doubt. Indeed, will she call the police now? And what will she say? "Come, because there is a relative unknown to me at my door, but he doesn't threaten or attack." After thinking, the girl, just in case, moved away from the door and dialed her friend's number. Briefly explaining the situation to Sandy, Victoria asked, "Help me out. I think your cousin knows someone in the police. Ask if it's not too difficult, what should I do?" "Understood. Don't worry. Give me 10 minutes and wait for my call." Sandy called her excited friend back, even a little earlier than the announced date, and joyfully said, "Wait, we'll arrive soon. Me and the reinforcements. You will open the door only after I tell you." Victoria sighed with relief. "Thank you, Sandy. I owe you." The girl tiptoed to the door to understand what would happen, and soon heard quiet male voices. It was very difficult to make out who was talking about what, and Victoria was now kicking herself for insisting on good sound insulation during the renovation. However, I didn't have to suffer for long. There was a knock on the door. Victoria led a friend and her cousin, Victor, whom she knew a little, into the apartment. A grandfather and an unfamiliar man appeared from nowhere. Sandy introduced him to Victoria. "This is Denny, one of the best lawyers. He will help resolve the issue with the least amount of effort." The man bowed his head and said in a pleasant baritone voice, "Although under such unexpected circumstances, I am very pleased to meet you. If you don't mind, let's all sit down at the table." I asked the citizen to calmly state the essence of his claims and present the documents that he has. "If you don't mind, Victoria, I'll ask you to prepare receipts for paying for the apartment. It can be for the last month or any other month. It's not too important." The lawyer's voice fascinates the girl. She was even glad about her grandfather's sudden invasion because this incident led to a pleasant acquaintance. While Victoria went to another room to get the receipt, Denny managed to study the passport that the girl's grandfather gave him and handed the document to Victor. "Hey, shiners, look with your own eyes. The stamp about marriage looks strange. It seems to me, Cousin Sandy, having carefully examined the stamp, began to photograph all the pages of the passport." Michael raised his eyebrow in surprise, but before he could speak, the lawyer asked him an unexpected question. "Which store did you buy the cake from?" The man even became dignified, boastfully declaring, "You can't buy this here. In my hometown, in the only confectionery they bake according to old recipes. Yesterday before leaving, I went in and bought it." Answered Tommy True. "Bennett, it looks like you and I, Michael, are fellow countrymen. Only I haven't been to my native land, perhaps for 5 years. Who's there in the candy store?" "Still the same woman with glued eyelashes." Michael nodded. The lawyer was delighted, as if he had been told the most joyful news. "We need to go and see how he trades." "So Michael, whatever you call it, that saleswoman has been resting in the ground for 15 years now. I doubt that you are related to Victoria. Even if this were so, according to the receipts that she kindly provided for the last 6 months, you are not registered here. You have no right to this living space. And if you are thinking of filing a lawsuit, you will only be wasting your time and money. So, good advice to you. Get out of here and don't show up again. Otherwise, don't even doubt it. I will find an article under which you can be brought to administrative or even criminal liability." Nodding, the elderly man with surprising pride grabbed his document and walked towards the exit. Victoria shouted after, Take the cake. I don't need anything from you." The fraudster did not resist or refuse and almost ran away from the apartment, of which he failed to become a full-fledged tenant. Victoria was overjoyed and agreed to release her saviors only after an impromptu feast. She sincerely thanked her friend, her cousin, and the lawyer who had so masterfully saved her from her problems and asked a direct question. "Nay, Denny, please tell me your fee." The man laughed. Sandy joined in the lawyer's laughter. Everyone made fun of the unlucky imposter. When the guests left, Victoria did not even think that the strange incident would have a pleasant continuation. However, the very next day, Denny came to her in the morning, brought coffee and cake from a rather high-status coffee shop, explaining this is as an apology for not being able to try the cake yesterday. The girl thanked the lawyer and, feeling a little awkward, suggested having breakfast together. During the conversation at the table, Victoria had the feeling that she had known Denny all her life and that he understood her perfectly. They even had the same musical tastes, which was not the case even with Sandy, who could not stand either rock or classics. Victoria was not even surprised that communicating with Denny had become a necessity for her, a real addiction. Once, during another date, the man reluctantly, as if embarrassed, shared with the girl the difficult story of his life. He said that he was married, and after a divorce, he moved from his hometown, a modest city, to the metropolis where he once studied. "That's it, until I meet you. I lived, worked, rented an apartment not far from the office, and didn't even think that I would ever love him so much." Victoria's heart melted from the tenderness of Denny, with whom she felt like behind a stone wall. A girl once invited her beloved man to move in with her, and he agreed. To confirm the seriousness of his intentions, he gave him a thin engagement ring and proposed getting married closer to summer. Now, can you imagine what a beautiful ceremony could be organized? No. Winter also has its charms, but you won't be able to have an enchanting photo shoot in nature. And I so want you to remember our wedding day forever. Now, I saw Sandy Victoria almost exclusively at work. One day, entering the tiny office, which they proudly called the trainer's room, she found her best friend in tears. "What's happened? Did you get injured? Should I call a taxi to the hospital?" Sandy shook her head. "Nay, I'm upset. I just don't need anyone." Van Mishoria was amazed. "What are you doing? I need you. In an hour's training, everyone will be waiting for you there. Don't mope. Don't be sad." Sandy burst into tears. "Now you don't even have time to talk to me. I don't have anyone to go dance with. Just relax." Victoria tactfully did not ask where the mysterious gentleman had gone, from whom her friend's eyes shone so much, and suggested to her, "Hey, let's sit with me this evening." Denny said he would work late. "He needs to go somewhere, and you and I will rest. We will set up a beauty salon at home, all kinds of masks, peelings." The girl's cheerful communication was in full swing when Denny returned to the apartment. He greeted Sandy warmly, kissed Victoria, and, after thinking, invited the girls to a cafe serving Italian cuisine. From that evening, the man also began to take an active part in ensuring that his beloved friend did not feel abandoned and lonely. On weekends, the groom took the bride and her friend to a country park, to a hotel for a picnic, or rented a house at a campsite where they could go skiing and snowboarding. Victoria was sincerely glad that her friend stopped shedding tears. In addition, things in business also went uphill. The girls even opened a branch of the studio without hesitation, entrusting all the paperwork to Denny. Victoria dreamed that soon her beloved would take her to apply. I found out in advance the work schedule of the wedding palace, all the formalities, details, and waited for this fateful day to come. The last spring month had already passed the halfway point, and I no longer talked about formalizing the relationship. Victoria would probably have walked around for some time, as they say, with rose-colored glasses and not suspect anything, but one day during a joint dinner, she had to leave the company of her fiancé and best friend to talk on the phone with the mother of one of the studio students. Girls. Returning to the table, Victoria almost caused a scandal when she saw Sandy, having moved to her rightful place, kissing Denny. The deceived bride had to call on all her self-control to help her almost calmly report, "So, Denny, as far as I understand, you are moving, so give me your set of keys. I'll collect your things and let you know when you can pick them up. Sandy, you also return the keys to my apartment." However, the friend was unembarrassed and, rummaging in her purse, said in a completely casual tone, "In general, I'm glad that everything is finally cleared up. Yes, Denny and I are together now. But let's not make a universal tragedy out of this, okay? I would like our business not to suffer because of your possible offense. Be professional. I understand that it will be difficult for you to see me, so I suggest we don't cross paths temporarily until you cool down. It's even scary. Just look, steam will come out of your ears. Sandy smiled triumphantly, putting a bunch of keys out of her bag and taking the apartment keys from the carabiner. She continued to express her thoughts. We'll divide the studios like this. The one closest to my home will be on me. You can safely conduct training in the branch. For rent, so be it. You will pay the minimum and you can take half of the profit that you make for yourself. The rest will be accumulated in accounts for future development. I think this is reasonable and fair. Victoria was surprised. Wait, Sandy, are you kidding me? Why do I suddenly have to pay rent and give away profits? I'm an owner just like you. Denny tried to calm down the girl, whom he had just not only abandoned, but also, thanks to her gullibility, deprived of a very significant part of his income. No, don't make a scandal. People are already looking at us. Kitten, understand this happens. Do not blame yourself. You are a wonderful person, a talented and beautiful girl. Everything will be all right. Let's remain friends. Pretendly. Let's build relationships in a civilized manner in new circumstances. I think you're being too dramatic. You, of course, as a coach and in dancing, have no equal. But in business, excuse me, you don't understand anything. Who, without looking, signed such papers as a general power of attorney, changes in statutory documents? The management of the business will be in Denny's and my hands. And you do what you do best. Show them how to dance. Victoria remembered that, indeed, without even reading and believing solely only Denny's oral retelling, she signed several sheets of paper and flared up. So, having actually knocked the ground out from under my feet, taking away the joy of doing what I love, you are also trying to look like a benefactor. Oh, what great fellows. But keep in mind that I will not give up. I will study all the documentation very carefully and will not allow you to wipe your feet on me. Grabbing her purse, Victoria ran home, not looking back at the calls to stop that the traders shouted after her. In the apartment, she running from one room to another, turning into the bathroom, into the kitchen, grabbed the Denny things she saw and threw them on the bed. Then she tied the corners of the bedspread crosswise and carried the unexpectedly heavy bundle to the door so that she could push it out the threshold as soon as her ex-fiancé arrived. Having finished clearing the apartment of Denny's belongings, Victoria rushed to study all the documents that were at home. The more the deceived girl immersed herself in reading, checking the meaning of terms on the internet if necessary, the greater her horror. Hearing how naive she was, how insanely gullible. How right the grandmother was when she said that you cannot trust anyone on condition. The girl could not imagine such a blow from Sandy, who she considered her best friend and her groom. Even in her worst night, and the power of attorney that Victoria gave to Denny played a very bad joke. The man, taking advantage of her boundless trust, legally arranged everything in such a way that the girl, in fact, had almost no rights to the studio. She was now not a co-owner, but an ordinary hired employee, and could not even arrange a vacation or set a convenient work schedule without Sandy's approval. Victoria, of course, could have quit even now, but she decided to try to work for at least a month in order to prepare an escape route, rent a room and organize a new studio there, luring the maximum number of clients. Victoria didn't even talk to Denny, who came to pick up her things. And as soon as the bundle with his things was on the landing, she hurried to close the door. Now going to her beloved Victoria's studio was like going to hard labor. A week later, the flow of customers decreased noticeably. Even regular students began to refuse classes. Victoria blamed herself, thinking that during training there was not enough courage, and that spark that ignites talent in people who are embarrassed to dance. But one day, one of the first visitors, who became a regular, opened her eyes to what was happening. It turned out that Sandy simply blatantly lures clients into her hall, not disdaining any methods. The most harmless lie of her ex-girlfriend was the supposedly random news that Victoria was going to leave, and therefore, of course, she had no time for class. Thanking her for the valuable information, the girl said goodbye to the visitor and went to the trainer's room on weakening legs. I wanted to grab my things quickly and, once I got home, unwind to my heart's content. However, she decided first of all to write to her ex-friend that she was quitting, and she immediately fulfilled her intention. The response message that came to the messenger on her phone completely unsettled Victoria. The photo showed a vignette-style invitation to the wedding of Sandy and Denny with a mocking column +1 before the girl had time to catch her breath. Another message came. We really want you not to be angry with us and share with us the moment of our joy. The dress code is smart. Sandy and Denny. Victoria was shocked. What did she do to humiliate her like that? Why are the people she considered her support now pushing her into the abyss of despair? Was she really that deeply mistaken about them? The girl didn't know what to do, but she clearly understood that in such a state, under no circumstances could she be left alone. You need to be somewhere among people so that sinful thoughts about the most terrible way to solve problems do not enter your head. The girl went to the nearest park. There are a lot of people there, and at the same time, no one invades your personal space. If Victoria's state of mind could influence nature, the leaden gray sky would be struck by lightning. People trying to quickly hide from the bad weather would be whipped in the faces by stinging rain. Gusts of wind would tear down the tents of installed street cafes. But everything was almost exactly the opposite. The mood of one unfortunate, humiliated girl did not change anything. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. Young greenery on the trees provided a pleasant, rich shadow, and the park looked great. The unknown florist clearly did his best to create a magnificent landscape and did everything with his soul. The park was much more comfortable than Victoria remembered it, and she sat down on a bench to try to detach herself from all the worries that almost brought her to the bad edge today. She felt as if she was performing on stage and the music disappeared again. Only this time the girl had no idea what kind of dance she was performing or what kind of melody she was playing. All that was left was to freeze in confusion and desperately try to figure out what to do next. Right in front of the place where the girl settled down, there was some kind of late variety of tulips, which looked, if not winners in life, then definitely the owners of the flower beds. I wish I had their self-confidence, Victoria thought, and her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a male voice. Why are you shedding tears? Victoria, who did not notice how she began to cry, was not going to talk to anyone and did not answer anything to the curious stranger. He left, but soon returned and sat down next to the sad girl. In each hand of the stranger there was a bowl of ice cream and a fluffy cloud of cotton candy. The man began to explain patiently in order to stop the girl, who was about to jump up and run away from him. Don't be scared, Victoria. But it so happens that I know you, although we are strangers. I work for a private investigator who, on behalf of your grandmother, worked to uncover the murder of your parents. Since we were seriously afraid that the scoundrels would use all means to influence the course of justice, my boss instructed me to keep an eye on you secretly. So we can say that you were my ward for several months. The girl looked closely at the man. Perhaps he had once flashed nearby, but she could not be sure of this. The stranger smiled and introduced himself. Me, Simon, employee of the private agency's secret. After meeting, the man handed Victoria a cone and cotton candy, explaining, in the movies they said that ice cream seems to make you more fun, but I thought maybe your throat hurts. So I took some more cotton candy. For example, I simply adore her. Victoria was in a bad mood and she answered Simon not too kindly. You can enjoy it. I try not to eat any of these types of sweets. The man smiled. Well, there is no way. True, I can't eat that much myself. Wait, now I'll treat those boys who are counting change at the kiosk, and I'll be back. Without knowing why, Victoria obeyed and waited for Simon. The assistant detective asked, You can consider this a professional interest, and if it's unpleasant for you, you don't have to answer. But I'll still ask, why are you crying on such a wonderful day in this beautiful park? Victoria grinned and decided to share her trouble. The day could perhaps be called wonderful, if not for one circumstance. Today, 2 traders took me and invited me to a wedding. My ex-fiancée is going to solemnly marry my ex-best friend. Also, the invitation is so mock for 2 persons. They know that I have no one to go with. They're making fun of me. I just don't understand. The girl briefly told Simon the sad story of her unsuccessful love, and the man even whistled. Listen, Victoria, you may not believe it, but my instinct tells me that someone elegantly arranged your acquaintance with this Denny. You know, your grandmother was more than generous. I then received a very round sum for the work, much more than I expected. I later learned from my boss that Irene even sold some of her things to pay. You know, I was still ashamed then. Well, I was young then, I desperately needed money. In general, I didn't, as I originally wanted, to return part of my fee to your grandmother. Today I saw you, and that old feeling of shame came over me. So it seems to me, now I have to kind of return the change in the form of finding out the truth about this grandfather and your ex-fiancé. If you want, come to the agency in 2 days. I'll give you a business card with the address and phone numbers, or we can meet in any other place of your choice. This was the girl who, during a conversation with Simon, had suspicions about the too close coincidence of tastes and views with Denny, looked at the business card handed to her and replied, "Perhaps the day after tomorrow I'll go to the agency. It will be more convenient for me." Victoria walked home and thought, indeed, how strange her acquaintance with Denny had developed. The man seemed to know the unmistakable path to her heart. He even used the perfume exactly the way she likes it, with a top note of lemon and a long-lasting sillage. After all, this is not the most obvious choice at first glance for a serious, successful lawyer, as Denny seemed to be. In addition, several times Victoria noticed that he frowned contemptuously when she danced to the tune of her favorite rock band, although he claimed that he adored their work. When asked why grimaces flashed across his face, the man answered very convincingly, as Victoria seemed to be in love, about sudden colic or an attack of headache. Closely studying her memories of the recent past, the abandoned bride discovered more and more oddities. Arriving home, Victoria was already convinced that Denny, having previously learned as much information as possible about her, had done everything to gain her trust and move into her apartment as a groom. Frankly, he managed it with ease. But what was his goal? Victoria did not keep any cash in her apartment. A sewing machine, fabrics, and remnants of the family jewelry collection were all the valuables that the girl had. Out of fear, Victoria checked the hiding place. A pair of antique earrings and a ring were in place. The girl calmed down a little, but the next morning, she took the jewelry and headed to the bank and put it in the safe deposit box, because she had no guarantees that Denny had not taken care of a duplicate key. Besides, Sandy could do it too. After visiting the bank, the girl planned to call a locksmith to change the lock just in case. Therefore, having signed an agreement to rent a locker and place jewelry there, I decided to withdraw the accumulated interest from the account so that I had cash on hand. However, an employee of a financial institution stunned Victoria with the news. "I'm sorry, but according to your power of attorney, all funds were withdrawn from the account yesterday." Trying not to scream, Victoria clarified, "Tell me, to whom did I write out the power of attorney?" You can see, the employee did not refuse the strange client and named a name that Victoria never expected to hear. It was not Denny who took the money from the account, as the girl assumed, but her ex-best friend. After thanking the operator, who sympathetically asked if everything was okay, Victoria wandered home. It suddenly became clear to her, like daylight, that it was Sandy who could so accurately orient Denny about all her likes and dislikes. It wasn't enough that her best friend didn't know about naive Victoria. It was at her suggestion and at her instigation that the man managed to appear in the image of an ideal. She believed in incredible harmony and love at first sight. Now, there was an explanation for a lot of things, and the fact that Sandy pressed on pity, cursing her loneliness, was also part of the plan. Surely, by inviting her to the wedding, the traitors also planned something insidious. Maybe someone would be involved in a raid on the apartment, while Victoria, swallowing tears, would say words of congratulations to them. After all, the friend knew for sure that she still had jewelry. She never told her where the hiding place was located in the house. Victoria did not contact the police about the theft of money, because formerly Sandy had a power of attorney, and there was no doubt that it was a completely real signature. The master replaced the lock on the door, and the girl felt a little calmer. However, she could not completely relax. I decided to use my insomnia to my advantage. Victoria began to think about an outfit to make a spectacular appearance at the wedding of people who had so vilely betrayed her trust. As soon as working hours arrived, the girl appeared at the secret agency office, following the prompts of the guard sitting near the turnstile. She found a door on which hung a sign with the name of a recent acquaintance and knocked. She came in. Before Simon told the girl the information he had obtained, she admitted, "It looks like you were right. Denny was instructed inside and out by my best friend. By the way, she withdrew money from my account by proxy, but it's my own fault. I signed all the papers that the groom gave me." The man confirmed. "Yes, I managed to talk to my cousin, Sandy Victor. He, perhaps, turned out to be the most innocent element in this scheme. In my opinion, it was used in secret. He's a big guy, and his main task was to creep up on the one who introduced himself as your grandfather." Having caught the surprise on Victoria's face, Simon explained. It was a well-thought-out production. Sandy, as I understand it, knew basic information about your relatives. Denny found an actor to play Michael. You saw your grandfather only in old photographs when he was young, and there was no need to fear exposure. The scammers wanted to get rich, and as I understand it, they almost succeeded. I think they invited me to the wedding not only to mock, but with the same selfish interest. Victoria nodded. I also came to approximately the same conclusions. I only have a few questions running through my head. Why did my best friend, who was there in the most difficult moments, suddenly decide to betray? Why did she decide to treat me this way? We never even seriously quarreled with her. Simon suggested, maybe simple envy or greed. These are usually the main motives for most crimes. Victoria's face even stretched out a little in surprise. Initially, my family was not much richer than Sandy's was, so it's definitely not greed. As for envy, it was not she who envied me, but I who envied my friend. From the moment my parents died, I went crazy imagining that Sandy could play checkers with her dad, hug her mom, and talk to her. I was overcome with envy. What can I say? I still experience this feeling even now. Maybe she's taking revenge on me for my envy, although unlikely. In general, I don't know what to think. I'm in a lot of pain right now because of everything that's going on. I will definitely go to these traders' wedding, at least in order to, looking at Denny and Sandy, clarify why they treated me so meanly. The assistant detective explained. With Denny's motives, everything is generally clear. He was driven by greed. In his hometown, he has so many debts that you can't even shout guard. He is a rather mediocre lawyer, but his habits are such that he cannot provide for average fees. There were also harmful addictions. He disappeared from the city, having deceived several ladies out of large sums. He was supposedly going to get married. He took money under plausible pretexts and quarreled. He was treated in a private clinic in our region. He gave the doctors almost everything he had from his naive fellow countrymen for his rehabilitation. So I set out again on the path of hunting for wealth. Don't worry, we will definitely fight to get both the dance studio and the money back to you. But don't make waves just yet, otherwise Denny and Sandy might simply run away. And I want to be answered fairly. Victoria began to thank the man, and Simon sighed. I've been able to find so much information on Denny these days that it's even surprising. It seems that he is far from stupid in terms of all sorts of not entirely honest methods. A true master, but apparently overly self-confident. Do you want me to tell you right now all the machinations that he managed to pull off in our city? Or better yet, wait, and then you'll see everything at the wedding. Although Victoria had a desire to know everything at once, she, after thinking a little, answered, I guess I'll wait. I don't really want to plunge even deeper into all this dirt right now. For now, what I have learned is enough for me. There are only two problems left, what to wear and with whom to go. I'm already working on solving the first one, but I don't know what to do with the second one. Simon, maybe you can keep me company, don't think. I will pay for the support because this is a separate job. The man shook his head negatively. No, I'm not suitable for a spectacular appearance. My appearance is standard, inconspicuous, and to be completely honest, well, will you come arm in arm with me, so what? Only your ill-wishers will experience pleasure at the first moment. Just think, it seems like they couldn't persuade anyone better. Here, if you take a swing, you need to deliver a crushing blow so that their mood immediately collapses. Listen, I think I know who to choose as your companion. If it works, it will be great. Well, if not, then of course, I'll leave you the company. The output may not be the most stunning, but I will give out amazing information. Victoria agreed that in any case, they would meet half an hour before the time specified in the wedding invitation and agreed on a place. Having said goodbye, the girl went to the handicraft store to buy accessories for her planned outfit. She only had 2 weeks to create the stunning dress. The time period is not the shortest, but the idea was not too simple. Victoria was nervous and pierced her fingers with a needle several times until it bled. In order not to burst into tears from resentment and pain, the girl recalled her grandmother's words that, according to a sign, a thing sewn with such incidents would definitely turn out perfect. The girl didn't have to rush to work and she missed her classes, but she was not going to bow to Sandy and ask to come back. Victoria was warmed by the idea that, quite possibly, the studio would soon be in her possession again, although her gullibility was already failing her. The girl believed that Simon would be honest with her. On Denny and Sandy's wedding day, Victoria looked truly dazzling. It looked like a spark of flame both in color and vague associations. The top of the dress was decorated with a bold, asymmetrical neckline, and the painted skirt with high slits at the seams playfully fluttered as she walked, without revealing anything unnecessary, but perfectly exciting the imagination. Victoria herself knew that she was irresistible in this dress, but she was pleased with Simon's praise. Judging by his quite ordinary clothes, the girl realized that her companion would be someone else, and was incredibly surprised when a man who had once tried to impersonate her grandfather approached her, the detective's assistant, and to introduce himself awkwardly. Michael, unemployed provincial theater actor, but Need forced him to play the role of a fraudster on trust. Pardon me for cheating if you can. Her heart was pounding as if before an important speech, but having overcome herself, she took Michael's arm tightly and walked with him to the restaurant rented from the traders. Asked at the entrance of the girl and her companion. Sandy's parents suddenly met, who very warmly greeted their daughter's friend and looked at her companion with undisguised interest. The bride's mother cordially invited, "Oh, Victoria, I'm so glad you came. Come on in. Almost everything is already assembled there. Have fun, relax, be happy for Sandy and her fiancé. Such a great man. I hope you will be lucky one day too. You deserve it." It was not easy for Victoria to endure this conversation, and as if sensing this, her companion squeezed her hand a little more tightly. Sandy's father admired the way his daughter's friend looked, and was rewarded with a displeased look from his wife, who dragged him further. "Have you forgotten where the manager sent us? Let's go quickly and see you." When Victoria and Michael crossed the threshold of the banquet hall, the girl noted with satisfaction that Sandy and Denny froze like statues when they saw the guests enter. The bride and groom did not look happy at all now. Having somehow mastered their emotions, they waved to Victoria and her companion. Sandy reached out to the groom's ear and asked, "What is this drunk doing? You said that he would receive the money due to him and drove off to where no one could find him." "Denny, I'm scared. I'm afraid that Victoria has come up with some kind of terrible revenge." Denny hugged the bride, pulled her close, and replied, "But hardly. He's just a similar person. Victoria has a good visual memory. She may have guessed that it was no coincidence that her grandfather appeared on her doorstep, and so that I can get to her quickly and without suspicion. So she decided to annoy us. You could say demoralize, poison the joy of our happy day. I thought about it, recalled in my memory what this supposed Dimitri looked like, and hired someone. There are plenty of actors in the country dreaming of an easy way to make money. So relax, Sandy." Victoria and her companion tried to behave as if nothing had happened, and in no way stood out from the rest of the guests, either by excessive joy or even more so by gloomy expressions. Thanks to the lady manager, they almost instantly found their table and sat down decorously, waiting for the start of the holiday, which promised to be very unusual. Victoria was pleased to note how worried Sandy was looking at her, and, meeting her gaze, she smiled as sweetly as possible. She had absolutely no idea what kind of surprise Simon had prepared and was in anticipation of what was promised. At the signal from the manager, Sandy's parents brought a huge pie into the banquet hall, and the fun began in full swing. The guests congratulated the newlyweds in every possible way. The bride's parents sang a duet. The groom's aunt arranged a long presentation of small souvenirs accompanied by rhyming lines. Victoria became more and more worried, but Michael calmed her down. And when the manager announced their turn to congratulate the newlyweds, the man quietly whispered, "Victoria, our way out. Give me the right to speak and listen, and be glad that you found out about the real essence of your ex-fiancé in time." Victoria's companion, carefully supporting her, took a place in the middle of the hall. The experienced actor didn't even need a microphone. His well-trained voice, surprisingly, did not lose its sonority after many years of libations, was heard in all corners of the hall. "So, ladies and gentlemen, Madame and Monsieur, I suggest you pay attention to the screen." The manager turned off several rows of lamps, and the room became much darker. Suddenly, to the sounds of Mendelssohn's March, racy footage began to appear on the screen, showing the groom with other women. Michael accompanied the changing images with brief information about the names of the groom's beloved. Having come to his senses, Denny tried to shout down the unexpected guest and convince everyone else that the image on the screen was a photo montage, but the seed of doubt was sown. Sandy seemed completely unaware of her fiancé's loving nature, and after the photo of Denny and Victoria's company, shots of herself flashed, and then the unusual movie continued with the participation of other ladies. She slapped the groom in the face and began to shout at him, not embarrassed by those present. "You bastard. You said that we would deceive Victoria and live happily ever after. He persuaded me to help take the dance studio away from her. And then you got involved with me just for the sake of profit. How could I not have thought to follow you? I decided to have a wedding. And then what were your plans? Run away with the donated money and squeeze the business away from me too. Hate you." Finally, the display of the wrong Denny on the screen ended. The lights came on, and Simon entered the hall, accompanied by police officers, explained, "Unfortunately, the holiday will have to end. The main heroes of the occasion are suspected of fraud." Sandy's parents rushed to law enforcement officials to explain that a mistake had occurred, but the police were adamant. Denny and Sandy were handcuffed and led to the exit. When the ex-friend caught up with Victoria, the girl asked her a question. "No, why did you do this to me? I have always considered you a person I can trust." Sandy grimaced and blurted, "You always got everything without problems. The first places are inherited. Even the students are drawn to you, not to me." Victoria was shocked. She tried to understand sincerely, as Sandy says. Did she really almost ruin her life? Indeed, because of the start, as Simon expected. Sandy spat angrily and admitted, "You have always been ever since the sports camp, and I was like a pale image with you. Do you know what I'll tell you? I was ever since I saw her dancing. If you really want to know, then it was I who tried to ruin your performance. It was because of me that the music stopped playing during your dance. Everything turned out in your favor." Sandy did not pay attention to anyone around her and, looking into her eyes, said, "The only moments when I was truly happy. Do you know which ones?" Victoria was silent, afraid to even guess, and Sandy smiled wryly and continued, "I was ready to jump with happiness. When you were suffering, it was just as difficult to hide your joy and feign sympathy." Sandy, distraught with emotion, tried to rush at Victoria, but it was not easy to do in handcuffs. The police took the detainee further. Ling So-Ford remained standing in the middle of the hall. She had yet to come face to face with her ex-fiancé, but he passed by, barely glancing at the neckline. Victoria asked after him, "Denny, aren't you ashamed?" However, the man did not even turn around. Semyon, who approached the display case, said loudly, "No, such people are never ashamed." At the request of her parents, Sandy Victoria did not make any claims regarding the money withdrawn from the account, and invested the compensation received in the amount of this amount into the development of a network of her dance studios. For her, the situation with her ex-girlfriend and fiancé became an excellent life lesson, and she was distrustful of the idea of dating that Semyon expressed. It took the private detective's assistant about 3 years for Victoria to finally believe in the sincerity of his feelings.
Diana was unbearably bored. All day long, she had to devote herself only to her 2-year-old daughter. Was that what she was aiming for when she was so diligently wooing the rich and promising John? Diana had succeeded. She married him, but it wasn't how she'd envisioned a wealthy family life. In Diana's dreams, it looked different. She imagined how Mary will travel abroad, dine only in expensive restaurants, visit beauty salons, and lying by the pool, sipping cocktails. In reality, it didn't work out that way. John worked all day, and yes, she was not mistaken. He was a very promising young man. He had recently purchased a large 2-story cottage in an elite area of the city. However, the repair was not yet finished, and even now on the second floor of the incessant drilling, knocking workers, talking in an incomprehensible language. Immediately after the wedding, John insisted on having a child, which Diana was not ready for. She has long tried to persuade her husband to live for himself, but the man was adamant. At the time of the wedding, he was 30 years old, and he was ready for fatherhood. But Diana was only 22, and she wanted to flutter and enjoy life. It didn't work out. A year later, Alice was born, and Diane had to immerse herself in endless diapers and formula. Sleepless nights and baby sores drove the girl crazy. John, on principle, did not hire a nanny to help Michael. He turned out to be a good husband, caring and generous, but at the same time, too authoritarian. The man had his own principles and he never deviated from them. One of these principles was that he believed that the young wife should watch over her daughter only herself. My mom raised me without any nannies. That's why we had such a close bond until the day she died. And you'll be fine. So tell me, what else do you have to do? We hired an au pair. No cooking, no cleaning. Just devote yourself to your daughter dying. That's easy to say, devote yourself. Every day is Groundhog Day. Diana hated even going to the park, where there was a big playground. That's where all the rich moms in the neighborhood usually gathered. At first, Diana was happy to get to know them all, hoping to socialize with them. But socializing with them was just talking about the kids. Diana was sick of it. If it were up to her, she wouldn't show her nose on the playground, but John insisted on daily walks, saying the baby needed fresh air. Of course he needed fresh air, Diana grumbled, gathering her daughter for a walk. Then he would walk by himself among these clutches. Happy Alice grabbed her sandbox set and a ball. The girl did not fit all this in her hands and she, frowning her eyebrows, looked at her mother. Alice, let's take one thing, either a ball or a set. The girl hardly spoke yet, but she was good at the word no. Diana sighed unhappily, took the ball in her hands and went to the exit of the cottage. On the one hand, getting out into the fresh air now was better than being among the endless sounds of the renovation. Diana and her daughter had just left the gate when a 10-car pulled up sharply beside them. Diana's excited friend Anna jumped out of it. Diana, hi. It's so great that I managed to catch you. Look, with what guys I met. Anna led her eyes in the direction of the car, from the windows of which two handsome guys were smiling. We're going to the beach now. Come with us. Diana was horrified. John would kill me if he found out. How would he find out? You'll be home before he gets home. If anything, you can tell him you got held up walking your daughter in the park. Alice won't give us away, will she? Anna winked at the little girl, knowing she wasn't talking yet. Diana hesitated. On the one hand, she really wanted to have fun with these cute guys, but on the other hand, she was afraid that her husband might find out. The girl was silent, thinking, and Anna hurried her. Diana, let's go. Don't let me down. I said I'd be with a friend. The guys are shopping for the picnic. They got champagne for you and me. I don't know what to think. Just get in the car. Okay. Diana's making up her mind. Is it okay that I'm with child? I told the guys you're a young mom. It's okay. Alice can play on the beach. What difference does it make to her where she builds her dollies? Diana nodded and, taking her daughter in her arms, went to the tent. She sat on the back seat, met the guys and asked them to stop by the store on the way to buy juice and cookies for her daughter. The girl needed something to do too. The guys drove to a remote beach where Diana had never been before. Wow, she exclaimed, getting out of the car and lowering her daughter onto the sandy beach. What a steep shore here. Yes, nodded one of the guys. It's pretty dangerous in this place. I'll tell you more. There's a whirlpool under that steep shore. You can get sucked in no time. We won't swim there. We'll swim here, where there's a gentle slope. At least it's less crowded. Imagine how crowded the city beaches are now. There's nowhere to spit. Diana agreed with that. Going to a crowded beach in the company of guys. A married girl does not need to. And here, in fact, it was not crowded. Apart from their company, there was only a young married couple with a boy of about 5 years old. The wife was in an old faded swimsuit, long out of fashion, and the couple had nothing on the bedspread except a water bottle. How did they get here? Anna asked in a whisper. I don't see a car. They probably came on foot, grinned one of the guys, taking bags of food and drinks out of the trunk. All right, let's get away from them and start getting settled. Girls, there's a blanket over there. Lay it down. In half an hour, the merry company, which had time to swim, was laughing. The guys, despite the fact that one of them was driving, drank strong alcohol, and Diana and Anna sipped champagne coquettishly. Diana didn't regret in the slightest that she had agreed to this trip. It had been fun with the guys. And Alice apparently was not bored. The beach was sandy and the girl did her favorite thing. Armed with a set for the sandbox, little girl diligently tried to mold figures. Bacham, a little shy, a boy approached her, the son of the vacationers in the neighborhood. Alice smiled and handed him her trowel. When the boy took it, the girl ran to her mom and pointed to the juice box. Diana stuck a tube in it and handed the juice to her daughter. Alice went back to her new friend and generously handed him the juice, but then the mom pulled the girl back. "Alice, don't let the boy drink from your tube. You can't do that. What if he's sick?" The boy's parents heard this shout and looked at each other. "I should have bought Michael some lemonade," the young woman sighed. The man nodded sullenly at her. Georgia shivered slightly under the appraising glances of the girls in the neighboring company. Her husband jumped up from his seat and took Michael by the hand and walked toward the river. He offered to take a swim, but she didn't feel like it. She felt uncomfortable when the girl forbade her daughter to share her juice with Georgia's son, and they only had a bottle of water with them. It's understandable, the family was desperately short of money. Georgia and her husband Steve had recently bought a one-room apartment and had gotten into huge debts. To pay off these debts, Steve worked like a curse, grabbed any part-time job, and when he was offered a column on the replacement of the roof in one of the houses of the private sector, the young man happily grabbed it. Of course, safety in such places was completely absent, and Steve did not hold on to the roof and collapsed, suffering injuries. It took him several months to recover, and he was unable to work during that time. Georgia's nurse's salary was barely enough to pay the rent and buy a rudimentary set of groceries, and the family still had to pay for kindergarten, buy him clothes, and wanted to treat the child sometimes, which unfortunately happened less and less often. Steve didn't work, debts were piling up, but Georgia didn't despair. Nothing. Steve is a very hard-working man and is almost well. Pretty soon he'll be back to work and the family will be back on their feet, paying off their debts. Today, Georgia had a rare day off and she wanted to get away with her beloved family. They'd chosen this normally deserted beach to get away from people. It didn't matter that it was a 40-minute walk to the beach. As luck would have it, this rowdy bunch of guys rolled in and ruined Georgia's mood. She knew one of the guys visually. He'd gone to the same school as her and lived not far from her parents. The rest of the merrymakers were unfamiliar to Georgia. The girl immediately noticed the arrogant, appraising look the girl's mom gave her, and she felt a little ashamed of her old swimsuit. "Well, so be it," immediately restrained Georgia. "Let me wear a swimsuit of 100 years ago, but next to my beloved husband and son. I'm happy with them and someday we'll have everything." The company was walking very cheerfully, noisily splashing in the river, loudly clinking, laughing. The little girl was left to herself, and it was evident that she was very glad when Michael joined her in her games. But then the girl's mother shouted at her and Georgia realized that the rest was ruined. "Steve, I'm tired. Why don't we go home?" she said quietly to her husband. The man looked at her shrewdly. He understood his wife with half a word. "Well, let's have one last rinse. Are you coming?" Georgia shook her head in the negative and Steve, shouting to the son, went with him to the river. After a while, Diana, who was already quite tipsy, noticed that the couple resting in the neighborhood began to gather. "Oh, at last!" She wrinkled her pretty nose. "Finally, they are leaving. I do not like that my Alice with this boy plays. They are like that." "What are they like?" asked Diana, one of the guys with whom she was having fun. "I know this girl. I went to school with her. She's all right. And her husband seems to be quite normal." Diana shrugged uncertainly and turned away from the couple. "Let's have a drink," she said cheerfully and grabbed a shot glass with strong alcohol, as they had long since finished the champagne with Anna. The girl Alice stood on the sand and sadly watched her new acquaintance, a boy Michael, taken away from the beach by his mom and dad. The girl kicked the ball with all her might, and it rolled down the beach and rolled down a steep cliff. Alice ran after the ball. The girl ran up to the cliff. The ball was not visible. Alice carelessly hung down, trying to see it in the water. Through the loud laughter, no one but Anna heard a slight shriek and a splash of water. Anna looked around and didn't immediately realize that something was wrong. When she did, she shouted loudly, "Diana, where's Alice? Where is your daughter?" Diana looked around with a dazed look. "Where is she? Where did she go?" "She didn't run away. She fell in the water. I heard a splash." As if on cue, the whole group jumped to their feet and ran to the steep bank. There were circles in the water, and in the center of those circles, Alice's ball floated orphaned. Diana abruptly began to sober up and was thrown into hysterics. "Alice, daughter, I can't swim, somebody jump in. Save my daughter." The girl threw herself on the guys' chests. But her new acquaintances stood there with their eyes down. They had warned in advance about the whirlpool in this place, and they didn't want to drown because of a girl they didn't know and her child. Diana howled and tried to push the boys to the shore to save Alice, but they froze in place. And then, past the standing guys and the girl struggling between them, a male figure flashed by lightning and dived into the water. "Steve, what are you doing?" There was a shout behind them. It was Georgia, literally dragging her son by the hand. She and her husband hadn't gotten far before they heard Diana howling. Steve instantly realized what was going on and reacted with lightning speed. Georgia and Michael ran to the shore and now, along with the others, kept their eyes on the water closing over Steve. The time dragged on for an agonizingly long time. It was only a few seconds, but it seemed an eternity to those standing on the shore. It was little Michael who was the first to fall. The boy roared loudly and began to call for his father. Then Georgia screamed. Panic grew. The girl's head appeared on the surface of the water with her eyes closed. Steve came up next, struggling to breathe and trying to push the little girl out of the maelstrom. It was obvious that the man was exhausted. The boys on the shore fussed. They scrambled down and, getting as far into the water as they could, held out their hands to the girl. Steve pushed the little girl toward them as hard as he could and disappeared under the water in the same second. Diana ran around the shore around her pale daughter, who was being given CPR by Anna, and ignored the wailing Georgia, whose husband had not come out of the water. Alice coughed and opened her eyes. Diana exhaled, grabbed her daughter in her arms, held her tightly against her. The girl cried. Only then did Diana look at Georgia running along the shore and almost tearing her hair out. What about her husband? One of the boys shook his head mournfully, lowering his eyes. That was it. He didn't swim out. I guess his strength's gone. Should we call whoever we're supposed to call in these cases? Police, divers? How do we call them? Diana was confused. Then everyone will know. Find out what? The guy didn't understand. That we were here. My husband will know. No, I can't let that happen. You call whoever you want. I'm calling a cab and I'm leaving. Diana, what are you doing? That man drowned to save your daughter, and he saved her, a dazed Anna exclaimed. And I'm grateful to him for that. Diana cut him off, but my husband mustn't know anything about it. The bewildered Georgia floundered on the shore. The girl hardly realized what was happening and did not notice the moment when the cab left the beach with her daughter. It still seemed to Georgia that Steve was about to surface, and she ran, keeping her eyes on the water. When the police arrived, she begged them to get her husband out, and Michael roared loudly as he sat on the sand. At some point, Georgia came to her senses, walked over to her son, and slumped down beside him and put her arm around his shoulders. Don't cry, son. Daddy will be all right. He must have surfaced somewhere else. The girl herself believed what she was telling her son. How could it be any other way? She couldn't think of any other outcome. They can't be without Steve. They just can't. And he can't just leave them alone. After a while, the policeman began to insist that Georgia should go home and the search should continue here without her. The girl shook her head stubbornly, sitting on the sand and hugging her son. She began to sway, as if in a trance, from side to side. One of the policemen, wanting to bring the girl to her senses, said to her rather rudely, "Stop thinking about yourself and think about your child. Look at your son. Why should he see all this?" These words sobered Georgia a little, and she looked at Michael. The boy couldn't cry anymore. He whimpered like a frightened kitten, clinging to his mother's side and staring at the river with swollen slits in his eyes. "Yes, Michael, come on. I'll take you to Grandma's. Then I'll be back." She turned to the policeman. "Back as soon as I take the baby to his mom." Steve wasn't found until the third day, when his body floated to the surface. Diane was waiting for her husband to come home from work. In the last few days, she had been such a good wife, just a goody-goody. In fact, the girl was very scared. Every day she called her friend Anna and found out how the search for the man who had saved her daughter was progressing. Strictly Nastrago Diana had instructed Anna to keep silent about their presence on the beach. Although, of course, both the police and the lifeguards were aware that the man they were looking for was a hero who had saved a child at the cost of his own life. But the mother of this child did not want publicity and left before the police arrived on the scene. Well, that's her right. No one could force gratitude. Still, Diana was shaking. Every day, when her husband returned from work, the first thing she did was to look anxiously into his face to see if he had found out anything. The girl realized that she was guilty on all sides. She went to the beach with strange guys, drank with them, and poorly watched her daughter. Yes, what a sin to say. Diana at that moment was a lot of fun, and at times she even forgot that Alice was playing nearby. But then again, even in those thoughts, Diana managed to blame her husband. It was his own fault. Locked her here, in four walls with a child, no rest, no respite. So she went off the rails. Obviously, John wouldn't accept that excuse. What would he do if he knew the truth? Divorced her the same day, at the very least. Diana was sure of that, knowing well the resolute temper of her husband. He'd also be able to sue for his daughter on the basis of what had happened. Diana shuddered at the thought. Don't think about bad things. Everything will be fine. Anna would keep quiet. It was her fault, and the boys knew nothing about Diana. Through the window opened on the first floor, Diana heard her husband's car drive into the yard. The girl put on a smile, fixed a beautiful bow on her daughter's head, and ran to meet her husband. "Oh, John, you're earlier than usual today. Alice and I missed you. Haven't we, Alice?" John smiled dutifully at Michael, absorbed in his own thoughts. And at dinner he was quite distracted, nodding occasionally at Diana's incessant chatter. "John, what are you always thinking about?" "My wife couldn't stand it." "Do you even listen to what I'm telling you?" "Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just thinking. I heard a story today. A man drowned in our town 4 days ago. They pulled him out yesterday." "No, I haven't heard." Diana's tense. "Well, drowned and drowned. It happens. Why do you care so much?" "It's just the details. The man rushed to save someone else's child, a girl, I think. He managed to save her, pushed her to the surface, but he ran out of strength and drowned. Can you imagine?" "Well done. What can I say?" Diana shrugged. "He's not just a good man," John said indignantly. "The man is a hero. I keep thinking, yes, many people would give their lives for their own child." John looked at Alice. "But for someone else's? Let's say, would I be able to throw myself into the maelstrom for someone else's child like him? I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a very dangerous place, and everyone knows it. That man knew it too, and he deliberately took the risk for someone else's girl. I admire people like that." Diana sat there, dead or alive. How unpleasant this conversation was for her. She really wanted to change the subject, but John wouldn't let her. "No, but you know what the best part is? The mom of the rescue girl took her daughter and left the shore right after the man drowned. She didn't wait for the rescuers, nor did she express her gratitude to this Michael, who was also there, by the way. Nothing. Nobody knows who she is. The only rumor is that she was drunk and didn't take care of her child. It was entirely her fault that the girl fell into the river. So drunk," Diana muttered angrily. "I don't know how life happens. John, we don't know all the details. Let's not judge anyone." "I am," John said defiantly. "I do judge a mother like that. She goes to the river with a little kid and drinks there. She's probably from a dysfunctional background and unmarried. A normal woman wouldn't act like that. And that man had a family, a small son. They say they were already poor, and now they were left without a breadwinner. And for whom, you ask yourself? Some naughty mom." The more her husband got angry, the colder Diana got. It's even worse than she thought. I can't imagine what her husband would do if he found out she was his wife. "John, what if you and I were to take a trip somewhere?" Diana blurted out. "No, but seriously, you and I had a lot of fun. We didn't go on a wedding trip. Then Alice was born. Let's go on vacation." "Okay, let's try it," John suddenly agreed. "Tomorrow I'll go to work and try to solve the most important issues. Maybe we'll go to the sea, if only for a while." The next day, Diana was not herself. She couldn't wait for John to come home from work, and her anxiety was growing. She wanted to get out of town before this story died down. Her husband had gotten a little too emotional about the so-called hero's behavior. Diane called her husband to see if he had been able to settle the important issues and if the trip would take place. When John reassured her, Diana happily rushed to the second floor to pack her things. Just then, the au-pair called out to her, "Diana, there's a girl at the gate asking for you." "What girl?" Diana was surprised. It was Sveka again. She jumped out and, with a quick step, reached the gate and opened it. All the blood drained from Diana's face when she saw who stood before her. It was Georgia, the drowned man's wife. "How did you find me?" Diana hissed at Georgia, closing the gate tightly behind her. "One of the guys you were on the beach with told me the address. He and I went to the same school." Georgia answered in a weak, quiet voice. She was staggering and dark circles under her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, or if she'd eaten at all, since her husband's death. But Diana didn't care about the appearance of this grief-stricken girl. She was only angry. Angry that Georgia had come to her house. "What do you want? Why did you come here?" she asked her rudely. Georgia didn't seem to notice the aggression directed at her and continued to talk quietly. "You know, Steve was just found yesterday. His body. Now it's a funeral, and I don't have any money to bury him. We don't have any money. Not me. Not my mom. There's no one to turn to. We already owe everyone. Steve didn't work for a while. He was sick. What's it got to do with me? Why did you come to me?" It was only now that Georgia began to realize how rude Diana was being to her. She looked up, scrutinizing her face. "I thought maybe you could help me with money. I'll give it back, not right away, but I'll give it back." "Oh, that's it. You've come to beg for money. You think because your husband died for my daughter, I owe you money? Did I ask him to do that? It was only his decision. He couldn't assess his own strength. Couldn't get out. Whose fault is that? All right, well, just stay here. I'll be right back." Diana ran into the house, and Georgia stood puzzled. This was not the reaction she'd expected from the rescued girl's mom. "Oh, not this." Georgia knew that if someone had saved Michael, she would have given that person everything she had and been grateful to the end of her life. And all she'd come to Diana for was a loan. While Georgia was pondering, Diana jumped out of the gate and shoved a couple of crumpled bills into the girl's sweaty palm. "Here, take these. I won't give you any more, and don't come here. You hear me? You don't have to give anything back, but don't ever show your face here again. And don't you dare implicate me in your husband's death. He took a dive, he drowned. Nobody pushed him into the river." Georgia stared into Diana's face with wide open eyes. She didn't even look at the denomination of the bills now clutched in her hand, but raised her hand and threw them at Diana's face with fury. "Choke on your handout. I don't know what my husband would have done knowing what you were like. He probably would have died for the girl anyway. That was Steve's thing. But except that I, if it were possible to rewind time, would never have let him jump in the river. I have hung a rock around his neck and held him down, wouldn't have let him." Georgia turned and walked away from the gate, and Diana picked up the bills from the ground and ran into the house, looking around cautiously to see if anyone had seen the scene. A couple days later, Steve's funeral was held. There were a lot of people there, and they were mostly strangers who didn't care. Many people in town had heard how the young man had died, and contrary to Georgia's expectations, the funeral was decent. People who learned about the difficult material polymeklaya of the hero's family began to bring his wife money. They brought free of charge, who can bring as much as they can, from the world by the thread, as they say. The largest sum was brought to the girl from a businessman who wished to remain anonymous. The girl could not believe how many people around her cared and was immensely grateful to them. But the loss of her husband was very hard for her. For the first year, the girl lived as if in a trance, floating along the stream, not noticing anything and no one around except for her son. Money was constantly lacking. Debts had not gone anywhere, and despite Steve's death, they had to be paid. Georgia worked 24 hours a day, taking a nursing job. She pulled the strain, forgetting about herself and seeing the child only at night, but at the same time trying to make sure that he had everything he needed. Michael went to school, and despite the fact that his mother never had time to do his homework with him, he studied very well. The boy became independent early. Being with him in public, Georgia often caught envious glances of her son in the direction of children proudly walking with their dads. When Michael was 9 years old, a patient with an attack of appendicitis was admitted to the hospital where Georgia worked. This man was much older than Georgia, but nevertheless immediately began to give signs of attention to the young nurse. At first, the girl only waved away from such an intrusive beau, but then she thought, and why not? The man seems to be not bad, divorced. According to him, he's very fond of children, and Michael needs a man's attention. Georgia made up her mind and tried to introduce the man, whose name was Dustin, to her son. She was very nervous bringing a man into the house for the first time. Contrary to her fears, Michael took to Dustin calmly and even joyfully. The boy told his new acquaintance passionately about his schoolwork, and he listened attentively, shaking his head respectfully. Georgia exhaled with relief. So that's the way it's going to be. Michael would need a father, and she could stop working around the clock and spend more time with her son. It's so wonderful to have a strong male shoulder to lean on. In 3 months, Georgia and happy Michael moved into Dustin's apartment. It was a rather spacious 2-bedroom apartment in which the boy finally had his own room. Dustin was very kind and attentive, but only for the time being. As time went on, Georgia began to notice that the child was annoying her new man. Michael was so attracted to him and was ready to call him daddy, but apparently his stepfather didn't want him to. "Call me Uncle Dustin. I'm not your daddy. You're not a little boy. You understand everything." Dustin snapped at the boy, and Michael shrank back. Everything seemed to be the same, except that now Michael didn't run to his stepfather to brag about his success in school and tell him about his affairs. Dustin seemed to enjoy it. Over time, Georgia began to realize that this man needs more of a mistress in the house, who will cook, clean, and the child was in his way. And one day, far from being a beautiful day, Georgia returned from her shift and from the doorstep heard her son crying. The woman rushed into the room and saw Michael standing in the corner. His legs were covered in red stripes and his belt was lying next to him. Dustin, smirking smugly, sat in a chair. "Oh, you're here? Listen to what your son has done." Georgia didn't want to hear anything. The blood rushed to her head. The woman grabbed the belt that was lying on the floor and threw herself at the man, trying to whip him as hard as she could. She failed, of course. A small, angry woman jumping with a belt in her hands near a tall man looked silly. Not expecting such a violent reaction, Dustin intercepted Georgia's arm. "What are you so mad about? He's a boy, and boys are supposed to be raised. It wasn't a big deal. I whipped his ass. My father used to whip my ass like that when I was a kid. That's why I grew up to be a man." Georgia cried. She threw the belt away and ran to her son, who was still roaring in the corner. Michael, come on. We're going back to our apartment right now. You will never see that man again." After her failed affair with Dustin, Georgia had stopped looking at men altogether. The young woman had come to believe that strangers could never treat her son as their own, and she didn't want to worry about whether her new husband had hurt Michael. Besides, Georgia hadn't been able to get rid of Dustin for quite some time. After she and Michael had left, he'd initially stalked the woman, begging her to come back, saying he'd made a mistake and would never lay a finger on the child again. But Georgia did not even consider the option of returning. She has a strong aversion to Dustin. It turned out to be not all surprises on the man's part. Once he was convinced that the woman had left him for good, he showed his true vindictive nature. Dustin began filing complaints about Georgia to the head doctor as an incompetent medical professional, and he also stalked her co-workers and told them nasty things about the woman. Georgia was shocked by these behaviors, but Dustin didn't accomplish anything with it. Georgia was too well known at work to believe the ravings of an offended man. All of these events only reinforced Georgia's belief that she shouldn't consider men as potential husbands. She should devote herself to Michael, which she did. Georgia got back on her feet and started working around the clock to provide for her son. The woman's life resembled a daily struggle for survival, but her son pleased her as he grew up a boy smart, kind, fair. "He's a lot like Steve," Georgia often thought. Only, is that a good thing? What did my husband's kindness lead to? To leaving us alone for the happiness of another man's family. It was that very family that Georgia saw in all its glory. Early one morning, she was coming back from another part-time job, tired. She had only a few hours to sleep and then back to the hospital. And then a large white car pulled up not far from her. Georgia didn't know much about cars, but even from the look of it, she could tell that it was very expensive. A man got out of the car first, and Georgia didn't pay him any attention until Diana stepped out of the passenger door. Georgia recognized her immediately in a flash. That hateful face seemed to have gotten even more beautiful. Why prettier? It was just better groomed. Now seeing Diana, the only expression that came to mind was gorgeous woman. Meanwhile, the man stepped to the back door of the car and, having opened it, helped the girl to get out. Alice was wearing a beautiful pink coat and white boots. Georgia's heart skipped a beat and she fixed her gaze on the child's face. It was because of this girl that her beloved husband was not in the world right now. Steve had given his life for her. Now she lives and he doesn't, and it could have been the other way around. How many times had Georgia replayed in her mind the events of that fateful day? Had they left then, just a few minutes earlier, and things would have gone differently. Steve would be alive and Michael would be growing up with a full family. And the woman herself wouldn't have had to work around the clock to feed her child. Steve. The woman's eyes filled with tears at the memory of him. How much she had loved him. He was probably the only man she could love in her life. Beautiful and happy as they looked, the family disappeared behind the doors of a store and Georgia watched them go. She hated Diana, but worst of all, and she couldn't help it, she seemed to hate the girl too. Her mind knew that the child was innocent, but her heart fluttered at the sight of this pretty little girl whose life her husband had given his own. Diana shrugged her shoulders shakily. She hadn't noticed Georgia, but she could feel the hateful stare directed at her back. Diana was already angry. Today, John had decided to take the day off, and instead of taking her to a restaurant, instead of devoting it to Michael, for example, he'd taken her and his daughter to a children's clothing store. Although Alice's closets are already overflowing with clothes. What's a baby need? She's growing up, and some things do not even have time to wear once. And John liked to pamper the girl, dressing her up in expensive things, giving her toys without measure. What else can he do? Grinned Diana. He won't have any other children. At least he's made peace with that. As soon as Alice was a little older, her husband began to insist on having a second child. John wanted a son. He just wanted a son. And Diana was horrified at the suggestion. What child? She only had Alice off her hands. Diana exhaled, being able to take time for herself. And here it was again. The mere thought of sleepless nights with a baby in diapers terrified Diana. No, she didn't want that to happen again. She's not a soul after all, to give birth on demand. She wanted to live and live beautifully. Obviously, if Diana told her husband about it, he would only freak out, so she decided to do the trickier. For a long time, the woman pretended that she could not get pregnant, diligently protecting herself secretly from John. Then she got herself a fake checkup. In reality, the woman paid the head doctor of the gynecology clinic for the report she needed and, with a sorrowful expression on her face, handed it to her husband. "What is this?" John asked. "I do not understand anything in these medical terms. Explain in Russian what it says here." "It says here that I can never be a mother again. You see, I won't be able to get pregnant again." "That can't be," the man exclaimed. "What kind of diagnosis do you have?" "Everything can be cured nowadays if you pay well. If necessary, you will be treated abroad." "It's not curable. It's not curable," Diana shouted, trying to cry. The woman pretended to be hysterical. "What do you think? I didn't recognize it. What do you think it's like for me to get a diagnosis like that? I wanted a baby so badly. What's gonna happen now? You're gonna leave me?" Diana pretended to shake with sobs, covering her face with the palms of her hands, her eyes completely dry. Through the slits in her fingers, she watched her confused husband's reaction. "Diana, really? Why would I leave you because you're sick? Don't be silly. But maybe we could try." No, Diane shrieked. "I've been assured there's no cure." John hugged his wife reassuringly, deciding to return to this conversation a little later when she had calmed down. He had no reason not to believe Diana, though. Well, what kind of woman would attribute infertility to herself in the middle of nowhere? Diana was, in principle, satisfied with the result of her performance. And when, after a while, John tried to return to this conversation again threw a tantrum. And that's how she made her husband forget about the second child. And yet, Diana was sure that her husband would never leave her because he loved his only daughter too much. So let him be content with her. And Diana herself has other worries. Her personal life. Diana's light flirtation with a fitness trainer recently turned into a relationship, and she plunged into it with her head. Starting this relationship, Diana was shaking a lot. It was the first time she cheated on her husband. Well, on the other hand, what does John want, disappearing all day at work? Diane is young and beautiful, and men are paying attention to her. Diane was freaking out. Once again, her meeting with her new, young boyfriend had fallen through. John asked her to take Alice to the electronics store and pick out a new smartphone for her birthday. Her daughter's birthday was 2 weeks ago, though. It's just that Alice wasn't happy with the gift. Here the father had succumbed to the persuasion of the girl, decided to give her a smartphone. Girls, Diana grinned. The daughter is already quite an adult dating guys. Diana should know that. It was John who thought her daughter was still young, and Diana felt her daughter was her competition. Of course she did, because her last lover was only a little older than her daughter. And yet he has no idea how old she really is. Before leaving the house, Diana cast a fleeting glance in the mirror. She looks great. How could one guess her real age here? What a young beauty she is. Diane hurried on, seeing that her daughter was already waiting for her in the car with John's driver. That asshole could go off on her own. Although where can she go without money? Mom, said Alice when the woman got into the car, maybe I'll drive myself. I know you have no desire to ride with me. Give me the money, I'll grab my friend and we'll pick out a smartphone with her. The girl squinted slyly. No way, sighed Diana. Dad said to go together, so let's go. In the store, Alice went straight to the most expensive gadgets. We should think. Diana, we do not consider the cheap ones. This one poked her daughter's finger at the latest model of iPhone. Mom, buy this one, but make sure it's gold colored. Young man, Diana called the sales consultant, please come over. Calling the guy, Diana thought to just give him instructions to make a purchase, but when he came closer and the woman saw him, decided to do something else. We want to buy this smartphone. Tell us about its features. The guy spoke, and Diana admired how young and handsome he was. No, really very handsome. Wavy black hair arranged in a fashionable hairstyle, and the eyes. You only see eyes like that in the movies. They seem to radiate light. Diana used all her tricks and flirted with the salesman, not noticing that her own daughter also keeps her eyes on this guy. The guy, on the other hand, only noticed the girl. He was inexperienced in the games of adult women and saw the girl's admiring gaze at once. Oh, you explain everything so well. It's rare to find such competent salesmen. I'll probably become your regular customer, cooed Diana when the guy made the purchase. We are always happy to see you in our store, smiled the salesman on duty. Walking from the hip, Diana moved to the exit of the store. A disheveled Alice walked beside her. Near the door, she turned around to see the guy she liked once again. Her cheeks flushed when she saw that the salesman was also looking at her. Michael. Alice whispered the name she read on the guy's name tag. I'll come here again, Michael. Mother and daughter reached the house in silence, but when they got out of the car, away from the driver's ears, Diana seemed to realize, oh, daughter, and we forgot to buy you accessories for your phone. Headphones, a case for your new smartphone. All right, I'll go back to the store tomorrow and get it for you. What color case do you want? Don't, Mom, Alice got angry. You don't have to go anywhere. I'll buy the cover myself. Will you stop fluffing up your old feathers in front of young boys? How are you talking to me? Diana shrieked. What do you mean, old feathers? Where do you see an old lady? Come on, Mom, you're not 18 years old anymore, and you're still looking at young guys. It's only Dad who doesn't notice anything. Of course, in front of him, you behave differently, and I'm already ashamed to bring my friends into the house. As soon as a less handsome guy walks in, you start parading around. You think I don't know where you go when your dad's at work, and how reverently you keep your phone close to you at all times. Stop talking nonsense, Diana shouted. And where do you stick your nose anyway? Are you trying to tell me what to do with the chicken's eggs? I don't want to hear any more talk like that. You won't if you don't go to today's store to wag your tail in front of the salesman. But if you continue to push him around, I'll tell Daddy. Or I'll have him catch you in the act. I hate that you're lying to him, but I'm used to keeping quiet. I've been used to it since I was a kid. I don't think you deserve Daddy. I just don't want to disturb his peace of mind. I don't want to worry him. Alice shook a little. The first time in her life, she allowed herself to talk to her mother like that, although she had long been seething with indignation, seeing her mother's constant cheating. The girl did not listen to Diana's angry answer, but turned around and jumped out into the yard. She took out her cell phone and dialed her friend Alfia. She had recently turned 18 and her parents had given her a brand new car for her birthday. Alfia, hi. Are you busy right now? Could you take me somewhere? An hour later, the girls were sitting in the car and looking carefully at the huge glass doors of the electronics store where Alice had recently bought her smartphone. It's still half an hour before the store closes. Alfia grumbled unhappily, looking at the time on the dashboard. What are we going to sit here for so long? Let's go in and look at your handsome boy. No, Alice was afraid. I've only been here recently. He'll know I'm on purpose. Of course he will, but isn't that what you want if you like him so much? How are you going to get to know him? Also, you forgot something. Is it okay that you're dating Oliver? You think he'd be so cool with you telling him you like someone else? Oliver's a complicated guy, and I don't think he'd tolerate that. Why do I have to think about Oliver right now? Who says I'm gonna make it with this guy? Maybe he has a girlfriend. Well, judging by your burning eyes, you'd move any girl, Alfia smirked. Half an hour later, the store employees began to disperse to their homes. In the crowd, Alice almost missed a tall guy who went out in the company of girls employees of the store. There he is there, Alice shouted sharply, pointing her finger at the windshield. Start the car, Alfia. Let's go after him. Why are we going to chase him? My friend was surprised. Okay, as you say, it's not difficult for me. I can't see him now, of course, but by all appearances, the guy is in demand among the female sex. Look at all those girls chasing him. He walked with his colleagues only to the corner and then, saying goodbye, ran to the bus stop. The guy didn't notice the car following him. He was thinking about the girl customer he met in the store today. Her mom, of course, is a little strange, but they have the smell of wealth. The kind of smartphone they'd bought would take him several years to save up for. But for them, it must be nothing. Michael sighed. As much as he didn't like the girl, how could a simple salesman like her? Mom, are you home? I'm home, Michael shouted as he entered the apartment. Georgia, who had just returned from her shift, had already prepared a flavorful curry for her son. My hand, son, she looked out of the kitchen. We'll have dinner now. How delicious it smells, squeezed his eyes, sitting down at the table. When do you have time for everything? How many times have I told you, Mom? You are so tired. Come from work and rest. I am able to cook dinner myself. I don't mind, Georgia waved her hand. Come on, tell me, how was your day? What's new? I met such a girl today. She bought a phone for me yesterday with her mom, and today she came back to get a case for it. We got to talking. She's cool, I thought a girl like that would never pay attention to me, but she hinted that she'd like to meet me. Tomorrow's my day off, and I'm gonna see her. And she has such an unusual name, Alice. I just don't know where I'm supposed to take her. She seems to be from a very wealthy family, and what can I offer her? A movie and a coffee shop? Georgia, who at the mention of the girl's name had an unpleasant prickling in her stomach, nevertheless paid no attention to it. I'll tell you what, son, if a girl really likes you, she'll be glad to go to a cafe with you. But I don't trust them, those rich ones. Why did they need simple laborers like us? And you should pick an easy girl, but that's up to you. Tell me, how are your studies going? When's the next session? Michael had finished 11 grades well and had a great desire to get a higher education, but Georgia could not afford it. They both realized that. Then the guy made an independent decision. Immediately after school, he got a job as a salesman, and after saving up some money, he enrolled in correspondence school. I will pay for my studies myself, he told his mother. I'll work and study by correspondence. It's no big deal. You're already out of your skin to provide for us. Enough already, we will last now. Give up the rate of nurse. Georgia stubbornly refused. The woman felt guilty. All their lives they'd been struggling to make ends meet and no savings and loan. If her son was going to go to college, he wouldn't have anything. She couldn't even pay for his education. The next day, Michael and Alice met in the city. The guy was a little embarrassed, leading the girl to the movies. What else could he offer this spoiled beauty? Alice didn't care. With this guy, she was ready to just walk around the city, holding hands. From one look of his expressive eyes, the girl's head was blown off. For the first time in her life, Alice fell in love like that without a second thought. It seemed that she was ready to follow Michael to the edge of Anna. Relationships were wrapped up rapidly. Alice, immediately after school, studying in the 11th grade, through half the city was carried to a familiar store just to see Michael and interchange with him a few words. The first day, she went on a date with Michael. Alice gave her current boyfriend Oliver the runaround. Oliver was a 19-year-old major with a cool car and was totally unprepared for this turn of events. To be turned down? How could she? Usually girls chase after him, and he dumps them after he's played with them. Oliver's wounded ego was at play. Alice's friend Althea was silent as a partisan and did not want to explain to him the reason for such a sharp break in relations. Then Oliver himself decided to track down his ex-girlfriend. It was not difficult at all. Oliver only had to drive up to the school, and there she was, Alice, rushing to the bus stop and driving in the opposite direction from her house. When Oliver realized the reason for the breakup was another guy, he was furious. How could Alice dump him for some salesman? The guy was a sucker, and Oliver's sneakers alone were worth more than all the clothes on that salesman, and probably more than all the things he had. Oliver couldn't let it go. Just as Alice had done, he waited until Michael's workday was over, and when he came out of the store, he walked toward him. "Hey, you. Let's go aside. We need to talk." Michael shrugged his shoulders and followed the major to this car. Oliver came to his car, leaned on it, and ostentatiously playing with the keys, looked threateningly into Michael's eyes. "You know Alice? Well, this is my girlfriend." After these words, Michael immediately realized who was in front of him. Alice was telling him about her ex-boyfriend, with whom she had dated not seriously, out of boredom, and broke up immediately, barely meeting Michael. "Ex-girlfriend, as far as I know," Michael smiled. "You two broke up and now she's dating me. She's the one who thinks we broke up, but it's not up to her. I didn't break up with her. In fact, Alice is mad at me, so she's using you to make me jealous. When she cools off, we'll be fine." "I don't think so," Michael countered. "You don't get it." Oliver began to argue. "If I ever see you around Alice again, I'll tear your legs off. Rip it out. Rip it out right now. What's stopping you? I'm telling you right now, I'm not giving up on Alice." "You're a tough one, I see," Oliver shouted and looked at his opponent appraisingly. Yeah, he'd probably lose to this guy in a direct confrontation. Michael was taller and shoulders taller, and judging by his gait, he's no stranger to sports. Oliver's favorite places to hang out were hookah joints and clubs. "I warned you, make your conclusions," Oliver said through gritted teeth, retreating to the driver's door. "I'm a man of my word. If I see you with Alice again, you'll be sorry, very sorry. But that's if you live." "Wow, what threats," Michael laughed. "I also repeat, I will not give up Alice." These words the guy said after the departing car, in which sat Oliver, seething with anger. Oliver was used to the fact that everything in life was easy for him, thanks to his father's money, and people, as a rule, always passed him up, seeing expensive clothes and a cool car. But those people are smart, Oliver thought. This one must be a fool. Fools are taught. Let him try not to listen to me. And it wasn't that Oliver needed Alice so much. He had plenty of girls like her, but his wounded ego called for action. After a couple days, Oliver was convinced that the salesman hadn't heeded his words and was still seeing Alice. Oliver sat in his car and watched them walk down the street holding hands. Anger boiled up inside. The guy already knew what he was going to do. Taking his gaze away from the couple annoying him, Oliver called one of his acquaintances. "Leshy, hey, I've got a favor to ask you. You've got the contact info for these badass athletes." Yeah, they're the goon squad that do certain favors for money, Set me up with them. I got a good paying assignment for them. What do you care? I just need to teach a sucker a lesson. A good one. Oliver, in his car, was following Michael down a dark street. Michael had just seen Alice off to her house and had gone back on foot because the buses weren't running because of the late hour. He couldn't even call a cab. Oliver sneered, driving slowly. Oliver waited for Michael to enter the dark alley. In addition to the driver, there were 4 big, pumped-up guys of gangster appearance in the car. These guys were providing some services for a fee, and Steve went about them as completely badasses. "We won't follow him for long," one of the jocks muttered. "There's a good spot over there. He's about to make a turn and stop. We'll book him there. But let's talk terms right away. How do we take the guy down? Like cold turkey?" "No, do the whole thing," Oliver shuddered. "Just break his legs, that's all." "Well, maybe he could spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair." "Deal," said the jock, pulling his balaclava over his face. "Keep in mind, if this guy points you out, forget about us. When they take you for one place, you better not even think about us." "I can't be taken for this place," Oliver said pathetically. "Do you know who my father is?" "We've heard," the jock muttered through gritted teeth. "All right." Client's turn stopped. Michael walked home happy, thinking about Alice. How'd he like this girl? At first, he thought that Alice is a major, but she turned out to be not spoiled by money and easy to communicate. At least in front of Michael, the girl never boasted of wealth and gladly went with Michael to the movies, walked around the city, visited inexpensive caves. And although Michael clearly felt their social inequality, still in the depths of his soul, he had a hope that they could do something. After all, the young people did not want to part in the evenings. Michael was walking with a slight smile on his lips when out of the darkness a big guy with a bat in his hand stepped toward him. His face was not visible, as it turned out later, not only because of the darkness, he was wearing a balaclava. At first, Michael didn't even get excited, thinking that he was mistaken for someone else. But then a man's voice sounded behind him, which seemed vaguely familiar. "Well, we've met, just as I promised." Michael turned sharply to look at the man who was speaking. It was Alice's ex-boyfriend, who had threatened him a few days ago. "Don't say I didn't warn you," Oliver grinned. "I keep my word." Georgia was working the night shift, and it was business as usual, except that Michael wasn't returning her calls. That made the woman a little worried. Her son didn't call back after a while, as he always did. Georgia calmed herself with the thought that Michael must have fallen asleep after a long day at work. He still managed to go out with his new girlfriend after work. Georgia did not approve of the relationship, having learned that the girl was from a wealthy family. The woman thought that such relationships could not lead to anything good, but let them sort it out themselves. Georgia was especially upset in the morning, although the time was still early, but usually Michael had already gotten up for work. Not only had he never called back, but his phone was unavailable. The woman had barely waited until the end of her shift and was about to run home when she was called from her post. "Georgia, can you drop off the case histories at the emergency room on the way?" "Yeah, sure," Georgia nodded, grabbing the papers. "I'll do it. It's no problem." The woman went down in the elevator, and her heart clenched with a bad feeling. Already heading for the exit, she caught herself and rushed to the waiting room. There at that moment, they were carrying a patient from the ambulance on a stretcher. Imagine, a very young guy. They found him when it started to get light. "We don't know how long he'd been lying there. He was beaten up, badly beaten. We need to get him to intensive care," the paramedic from the ambulance told the emergency room nurses. Georgia herself didn't know what force made her, approach the stretcher and look into the face of the beaten boy. Her heart stopped beating. Her eyes were covered with a veil. The woman fainted right in front of the stretcher. "What's wrong with her?" The paramedic was surprised. "That's the nurse from surgery, right?" "Yeah, that's Georgia." She looked at the guy and collapsed right away. Must be someone she knows. What if it's... Oh my God, she told me she had a son that age. God forbid. Georgia came to her senses on the couch where the nurses had moved her. She remembered everything right away. The guy they brought in the ambulance. "He's in the ICU, Georgia. Do you know him?" Georgia jumped up off the couch and rushed out of the emergency room. "It must be her son. I'm not mistaken," the nurse muttered. "What a grief." Even though Georgia was a nurse, they wouldn't let her in the emergency room, no matter how hard she tried. "We're gonna do everything we can to help your son, and you don't need to see him right now. Believe me, there's nothing you can do to help him now. Here, take his things for now." The doctor put a bag of clothes in one hand and Michael's cell phone in the other. Georgia accepted it and absently pressed the power button. The phone, beeping merrily, blinked with a lighted screen. The screensaver showed his face pressed against the girl's cheek. There she is, his Alice, Georgia thought. Wow, how much did my son talk about her, and he never bothered to show a picture. Then numerous social media messages from this Alice girl simultaneized on the screen. "Michael, where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you answering?" Georgia clicked on one of these messages and found herself on the girl's page. What an interesting status she had. "My favorite is the best in the world." Did she write that about Michael? Swallowing back tears, Georgia thought. Maybe this girl actually loves him. I'll have to tell her what happened, but later, when my son comes to his senses. And Michael must come to his senses. Otherwise, there's no reason for me to go on living. My son is the only thing that makes sense in my life. I've already lost my beloved husband once, but then there was Michael and there was something to live for. The girl Alice apparently saw that Michael was online and sent a bunch of new messages urging him to answer her. Georgia flipped down the screen. Alice's pictures flashed up. There she was at home. Yes, this girl is not a poor girl. Yeah, and here she was, apparently with her parents. Georgia fixed her eyes on the face of Alice's mother. The phone fell out of her hands. The woman slowly slid down the wall, passing out for the second time that day. Diana and her husband were having dinner. It was one of those rare evenings when John came home early and Diane herself had no plans. The couple ate in silence. It had been a long time since they'd had a common topic of conversation. Diana didn't want to know how her husband was doing at work, and he wasn't interested in how his wife spent her time. Their only common topic was their daughter. After a long silence, John asked Michael a question. "Where are we with Alice? I don't see her that much lately. Where is she?" "How should I know?" The wife shrugged her shoulders. "She doesn't report to me. Probably out with her boyfriend." "What boyfriend, Oliver?" "You're out of touch with life," Diana snorted. "Our daughter broke up with Oliver. She's got another friend of her heart now. She hasn't brought him home, and something's gone wrong there, judging by how nervous Alice has been the last few days." "How is it, Diane? You stay at home and you don't talk to your daughter at all. No matter where you ask, you never know where she is." "I realize she's a big girl, but not so big that you can't control her." "Does she let herself be controlled?" Diana exclaimed indignantly. "Tomka is like a prickly hedgehog, snapping at you when you ask her anything. She only snaps at you. And that's what I don't understand, because you're her mother. You're supposed to be close, but you're the opposite." John did not have time to finish, as a disheveled Alice burst into the dining room and began to shout at her mother. "Mom, what happened on the river 15 years ago? Tell me now." "Alice, are you out of your mind?" John frowned. "Why do you let yourself yell at your mother? And what's the matter with you anyway? What's that look? Did you get into a fight with someone?" John noticed a bright red scratch on his daughter's cheek. "I wasn't in a fight, Dad. A complete stranger tried to beat me up." Alice plopped down on a chair and grabbed a glass of water from the table and began to drink greedily. Frowning, John looked at his daughter and waited for her to get drunk and explain to him what was going on. "I'll tell you everything first, Dad," said the girl, seeing her father's tense look. "I'm seeing a guy right now. His name is Michael. He's nice, very nice. He's a part-time graduate student, and he's working so he can help his mother. She raised him alone." Michael always spoke only warmly of his mother. "I love Michael, Dad, I really do. It's not just a childhood crush anymore. 3 days ago, he disappeared, stopped contacting me. I couldn't breathe at the thought that he might have left me. I really couldn't breathe without him. Every day I went to the store where he works, but the employees didn't know anything. Michael just disappeared, never showed up for work. And just today, one of the clerks found out what really happened to Michael. He was beaten up on the street and he's still in intensive care. I found out what hospital he was in and I ran straight there. And his mom was there. Dad, you have no idea what happened. She attacked me in the hospital hallway. At first, I thought the woman was crazy. She wanted to scratch my eyes out. I couldn't understand how a person who didn't know me could lash out at me with such hatred. But she didn't do it silently, she screamed. Screaming that I was the curse of her life, that 15 years ago she lost her beloved husband, his father, because of me. And now Michael had been beaten up, again because of me. When the nurses pulled this woman away from me, I started screaming too. I yelled at her, "You're crazy. I've never met you before. Why do you think Michael was beaten because of me? And what does your husband have to do with it? Ask your mother. Let her tell you how 15 years ago my husband gave his life for someone else's child on the river. For you. Your mother was too drunk and partying to watch her own daughter. Michael's mom told me to get out of the hospital and never dare go near her son again. And I love Michael, and I'm not going to listen to her. I don't know how badly he was beaten, but if he dies, I die with him. Now I ask you, Mom, so what happened on that river 15 years ago, and why does that woman hate me so much?" Diana sat there, neither dead nor alive. She straightened in her chair like a taut string, and the woman's eyes darted from her husband to her daughter. Diana realized what she had feared for so long had happened, and then she relaxed. Time had passed, all was forgotten. That's what Diana thought. And it turned out that's how the truth came out. The woman rolled with a nervous laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about, Alice. This is really crazy." "I don't think so," said a pale John. "For some reason, I remembered the story on the river very well. A man drowned there, saving someone else's child. Why do I remember it? Because at the time I thought a lot about that man's selflessness. I even gave his widow money as financial aid through other people. But what makes her think it's you, Alice? She's deluded. Maybe you look like that girl. Maybe someone put it in her head." "Okay." John got up from the table abruptly. "Now you and I are gonna go with her, and we're gonna get to the bottom of this." Yes, let's go, Daddy," Alice nodded often. "Tell that crazy woman that she is wrong, and I want to see Michael. I want to know what's wrong with him." "You don't have to go anywhere," Diana shrieked. "You've already realized that this woman is not in her right mind. Apparently, she's a disturbed woman." Diana faltered at the suspiciously angry look her husband gave her, and realized that the seed of doubt had already been planted in him. Georgia was sitting on the couch in the nurse's lounge, drinking valerian. "Georgia, what are you doing?" A nurse she knew said with horror. "Why are you so hard on that girl? I thought you were going to tear her hair out. Is this really the girl who drowned your Steve?" "Well, even if it wasn't the girl's fault." "Guilty as charged," exhaled Georgia, who had become a little sluggish under the sedatives. "My son was beaten up because of that girl. I lost my husband because of her. I hate her and her mother. I hate them so much. Why did they come into our lives and become a curse on our family?" An orderly came barreling into the nurse's room and looked at Georgia warily and said, "Georgia, there's this. A man's here with the girl you've been roughing up. Apparently it's her father, and he insists on talking to you. They weren't allowed into the station, of course. They're waiting for you downstairs in the visiting room. Let me tell him you're sick and can't come out. This guy's very solid. Probably wants to confront you for beating up his daughter." "What? You think I'm afraid of them?" Georgia jumped up. "After what's happened to me in this life, I'm not afraid of anything or anyone. The worst has already happened. But Michael is still alive," said the nurse timidly. "Yes, my son is alive. And to keep him alive, I must keep him away from this family." Georgia jumped up from the couch and ran past the nurse and the frightened nurse. "Don't let anything happen again," the nurse muttered. "What if there's a fight? Georgia's probably not in her right mind. I've been working with Georgia for years, and I'll never forget what happened to her when her husband drowned. Then she was all about Michael, living for her son, and here she is again. And it's all because of this family. It's like a fate, really." Jonah and Alice. Georgia came down, seemingly calm. They had no way of knowing it was the sedatives they'd given her in the nurse's station. The drugs had given Georgia a certain lethargy, but her gaze still flashed with rage when she saw Alice sitting on a bench next to a stout man. John intercepted that look and jumped up from his seat, blocking his daughter. "Your name is Georgia, and you beat my daughter. I'm not going to return the favor. I think you were acting in a state of shock. I take it this is all about a story from 15 years ago on the river. Only tell me, what makes you think Alice is the girl who drowned? You're deluded. Am I mistaken? Laughed Georgia bitterly. Do you really think that I saw a resemblance to that child in Alice and threw myself at her because of that? I didn't. I just recognized who her mother was. You're dying I'll remember for the rest of my life. What are you doing here? Messing with me? You can't be ignorant of that story. I've heard of that story and I admire your husband, but I never imagined it would happen to my girl. If you're right, my wife hid everything from me. Tell me exactly what happened. What happened? Your dying got drunk with a friend and two guys and didn't watch her daughter. The girl fell off a cliff. Steve and I were on our way home when panic set in. My husband jumped in after your baby. He knew about the vortex, and he warned me repeatedly not to go near it. Steve knowingly sacrificed himself for a chance to save someone else's daughter. Then I came to your house to ask for money for the funeral, alone, but your wife treated me like a beggar, reprimanded me and said that no one asked my husband to jump, it was his own fault. She couldn't have said that. John shrieked. Diana is far from perfect, but she's not that cynical. I see you don't know who you're living with, and you don't know what goes on in your own home. How can you not know that your child almost drowned? You're a bad family. You're a rotten family. Steve and I had a real one. We loved each other, and after he died, life became a struggle to survive. Your daughter's living the good life. She's a beautiful, spoiled brat. But my son is in intensive care because of her. I don't know if he's gonna make it. What do you mean you don't know? Michael could die. Alice cried from behind her father's back. And why me? Why are you blaming me for everything? Because your ex-boyfriend beat up Michael with the help of some thugs. His name is Oliver. Michael regained consciousness and told the coroner everything. Oliver? Oliver did it? Are you sure? John was surprised. I know his father well. A lot of people know his father, believe me. And the investigator's eyes glazed over when he heard that name. It's already clear that Oliver won't be held accountable for anything. He will, John said imperiously, looking intently into George's eyes. If he's guilty, he will, I give you my word. His father is a powerful man, of course, but I'm not the last man in this town. I'll do my best, but Oliver will be held accountable, and someone else will, and we'll see you again. John said the last words as he walked toward the door, dragging his daughter by the hand. Alice was crying. Why did you say that Michael might not survive? She looked back at Georgia. That was all the girl cared about at that moment. Diana sat in the living room, all tense and ready for the upcoming conversation. It seemed to her that she was ready. Well, after all, it had been so many years. She was young and foolish. John must discount that. As her husband whirled into the house and opened his mouth, ready to unleash the full force of his anger on his wife's head, she prevented him from doing so by speaking first. I get it, you found out. You are aware that it was Alice, that she was the one who drowned in the river. So, yes, I made a mistake going to the river, but that was a long time ago. I would have told you back then. But do you remember how you acted? How do you blame that negligent mother you said you had, not knowing it was me? And I was right. John roared. I still think so. Neglectful, you put it mildly. I think much worse of you. You've never been a normal mother, and I've put up with you all my life for my daughter's sake. And now it turns out our daughter might not be alive if it weren't for a stranger, and all because of you. What are you talking about? Diane is boiling. He tolerates me, and I don't? Or do you think life with you is easy? You're never home. How many times have we been away together? I can count on my fingers. You think that's life? Well, as far as I'm concerned, you're living life to the fullest. Or do you really think I don't know about your young lovers? I just didn't care. I don't care about you, Diane. About you or how you spend your time. As long as you don't bother me. I didn't divorce you so I wouldn't traumatize my daughter. Then there's that damn disease, your infertility. I'd be a bastard to divorce you, leaving a sick wife. So I put up with it. I haven't felt anything for you for a long time, and I don't care if you're going out. But now that I know you almost killed a child, lying to me and shitting on the soul of Steve's widow who turned to you. You're such an asshole, Diane. I don't want to see you another day. You realize this is the end of our married life together." Diane was furious, realizing that nothing could be done now, and John would divorce her anyway. She wanted to hurt him too. So be it. Go ahead and divorce him. I'll tell you what, you're not only a horny deer, you're a dumbass. You say you live with me because I'm infertile? I'm not infertile. I didn't want to have a baby. I didn't want to nurse those little snotty babies. And I didn't care that you wanted a son, so you had to settle for just a daughter. John squinted angrily at his wife and unexpectedly for her, laughed. "Do you think you've trampled me now? Don't get your hopes up. Yes, I felt sorry for you and believed you, so I did not leave you. But I wasn't gonna give up my kids because of you. I've got a second family with 2 kids growing up. The oldest is 10 years old, and now I won't even wait for an official divorce from you. I'll bring them here as soon as you leave the house. And you'll be out of the house fast, and I'll talk to Alice. I don't think she'll want to go with you. You're such a bad mother. Your daughter will never support you." Diane was trying to play nice and get a divorce. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I won't be alone either. And in the divorce, I'll take half of everything you own." "It's not gonna work, Diane. You're gonna walk away with your ass naked. You think because you've been cheating on me for so long, I haven't taken care of it. You signed the papers without realizing it, and you get nothing in the divorce." "That can't be," Diana shrieked. "You bastard. I didn't sign anything. And if you did, I'll hire a lawyer to prove that you did it all by deception." "What are you gonna hire a lawyer for, Diane? It takes good money to hire a good lawyer. Now who has more money, you or me? You know, when I slicked you those papers to sign, I wasn't really planning on using them, just in case. And now I realize you're being punished. It's a little punishment for being such a scumbag." Oliver was rocking out in the club to the rhythmic sounds of loud music when 2 men in civilian clothes approached him, quickly waving a crust in front of the guy's face. One of them threw, "You're under arrest." Oliver was a little stoned, and he found himself laughing eerily. "I'm in custody. Do you even know who you're talking to? Do you know who my father is?" We know, muttered one of the cops, roughly pushing Mitri into the duty car. "We know everything, all questions to the superiors." It was necessary to see the confusion on Oliver's face when he realized that what was happening was not a joke, not a prank of friends, and he was really being taken to the station, knowing who his father was. The next morning, a confused secretary came into John's office. "John, there's a man here to see you. I told him you were busy." "Get out of the way," rudely pushed the girl away, a full, balding man in an expensive suit, bursting into the office. "Hello, John. I'll get right to the point. My son was arrested yesterday. Can you believe it? Oliver was arrested right in the club." "I know," John replied, making no attempt to stand up, and offered his hand to his old acquaintance. "You know, don't you?" The man frowned. "And I thought it wasn't true when I was told that this arrest had its roots in you." "It's true, Archie. Your son brutalized a guy, and he's gonna be held accountable for it." "Who said that?" The big man got all worked up. "Who's the boy?" "It was just a fight over a girl. Your daughter, by the way. But that guy's nobody, and his name's nobody." "I don't get it, John. Do you have a personal grudge against me?" "No, it's nothing personal. It's just that the guy's not a stranger to me. Consider it that." "Who is he to you?" Archie's confused. "Is he so close to you that you're going to fight with me over him?" "Very close. I'm ready to fight if I have to." John got up from the table. "You know, it's just that whoever has the most money is right. In this case, you lose. I'm not doing anything illegal, and your son will be held fully accountable for what he did. And he's going down. You want to fight me, Archie? Believe me, I'll go all the way." Sweat beaded on the big man's bald head. He'd known John for years and knew that when he said he'd go all the way, he'd go all the way. Archie knew the man's stubbornness firsthand, and Archie knew John's capabilities too. "John, come on, really. We've known each other for years too. What's he gonna do? Go to jail? It's not that big a deal. Maybe he'll get off on probation." "He won't," John said meaningfully. "It'll be what the court says it will be. By the law this time. Oliver's not your only son, is he? What would it be like for the other 2 if Dad went bankrupt?" "Even so," Archie squinted at him. "Even so," John cut him off. At the same time, in the hospital, under the door of the intensive care unit, Georgia was sobbing. The doctor had recently told her the terrible news. Michael's kidneys were failing. He needs a transplant. Of course, he will be put on a waiting list for a donor organ, but Georgia has worked in medicine for too long and knew perfectly well what the chance of waiting for that waiting list is. Mine, take mine, Georgia shouted without hesitation. The doctor nodded, as if knowing her mother's reaction in advance. Yes, it is possible in principle. Let's go through the necessary examination, and we will make sure that your organ is suitable for transplantation. And so, a few minutes ago, the doctor said that her kidney is not suitable. As she wept, Georgia tried to pull herself together, stop crying, and find a solution. Something had to be done. Michael could go on for hours. She of all people should know that. The woman straightened up, wiped her tear-stained eyes, and only then saw Alice peeking out from around the corner leading to the emergency room. Brave fool, thought the woman. Have you come again? Did I not clearly tell you not to show your face here anymore? Kill me. Alice took a step out of the corner. Kill me. Pull out all my hair. I'll still come here. I've been standing here a long time and I heard you talking to the doctor. Michael needs a kidney transplant and yours isn't a match. Take mine. I'm ready. Georgia looked carefully at the excited, covered with red spots girl. Dummy, do you realize what you're proposing? It's not an easy surgery. Anything can happen when you take a donor organ. You could die. But even if everything goes well, you'll only have one kidney, and that's not a full life. Do you realize that? I'm not as stupid as you think I am. I understand the risks. Even if I die, I'm okay with it. No, that's not the right word. I don't agree. I insist. I would rip a kidney out of myself just to keep Michael alive. When I think he might be gone, I don't want to live. Georgia looked at Alice thoughtfully, as if seeing her for the first time. You stupid girl, you don't understand anything yet. You're a minor and you don't have the right to decide such things. Maybe, I admit, you really love my son, but I can't do anything about my dislike for you. Alice flew out of the hospital like scalded and threw herself on the roadway, blocking the way of a yellow car with a checkered flag. The cab driver braked sharply, almost touching the girl standing on the road with his bumper. He jumped out and attacked her, almost with fists. What are you doing, you crazy girl? You're sick of living. Go throw yourself off the bridge. What do I have to do with it? Alice didn't listen to him. She ran to the passenger door, opened it, and got into the car. I need you to take me downtown now. I'm not getting out of the car. Take me. I have to go to my father's office. The cab driver was already eyeing the unstable passenger with apprehension. Either she was crazy or this girl had something happen, and it was serious. The man silently got behind the wheel and turned the car around. John's secretary had only recently come to her senses after a visit from a man who had roughly pushed her, and then Alice burst in and raced to the door of her father's office. Your daddy doesn't have time. He has a meeting, the secretary shouted at her back. Alice flew into the office and, not paying attention to several respectable men sitting at a long table, shouted, Daddy, you have to authorize me to donate a kidney to Michael. Well, John said angrily, I didn't raise you well, daughter. Don't you notice anything around you? You don't see people sitting around and you barge in. Go out to the waiting room and wait there. No, Dad, this case can't wait. Michael could die. Okay, got it, Dad sighed heavily. He turned to his staff. Would you mind leaving us? The meeting is adjourned. Sorry, family matters. The men rose at the same time and, looking disapprovingly at the chief's ill-mannered daughter, left the office. I'm listening to you carefully, Alice. What happened there? I was at the hospital. Michael's kidneys are failing. He needs an emergency transplant. His mom's kidney isn't a match. He has to wait in line, and he might not get it, you know? I'm young, I'm healthy, I can easily live with one kidney. But I'm a minor, you have to sign the authorization. That's out of the question. John cut him off. Alice screamed. She screamed and screamed, not noticing that her father was sitting with his hand on his head, not paying any attention to his daughter, thinking carefully about something. Shut up, Alice, he finally said, raising his head at Alice. I already told you, you won't be Michael's donor, I will be. If my kidney is a match, of course, but somehow I think it will. It has to be. Michael's father gave his life for you. and I'm only giving a kidney for his son's life." Diane stalked her daughter outside the school. It's not the first time a woman's done that. And it wasn't because she missed Alice. She needed the money. Of course, Diana left her husband's house not completely empty-handed, and she had money and jewelry in sufficient quantity. But she had moved in with a young and voracious lover. Voracious not in terms of food, but in terms of needs. Having got in touch with Diana, the guy was used to living large and was not going to moderate his appetites. Moreover, now Diana lives on his territory, although he did not ask her to do so. Diana's money ran out lightning fast, and the young friend began to hint that he was not going to provide for a grown-up aunt. And they had no obligations, they met only for pleasure. Diana felt humiliated, but she had nowhere to go, so she turned to her daughter for the first time. Alice, quite predictably, decided to stay with her father. Alice had money. Her father was never stingy when it came to his favorite daughter, and she had given it to her mother several times. But the money was running out fast. "Alice, hello." Diana waved her hand from the ajar window of the car John had generously allowed her to take. "I missed you. Come on, get in the car." Alice sighed sadly and separated from the flock of girlfriends with whom she came down from the school porch. The girl walked towards her mother's car. "I don't have any money," was the first phrase of the girl when she sat down next to Diana. "What? No money right away?" Her mother pouted. "Can't I just visit my daughter?" I said I missed her. "Don't lie to me, Mom. You never missed me. In fact, you didn't need me. I realize that now. You came for money, and I don't have any." "Why not?" Diane raised her eyebrows. "What, did your daddy turn his attention to his new kids? And you don't get anything from him?" "That's not the point, Mom. Whether I get money from my father or not is none of your business. I don't have any more money for you. I know you didn't leave home empty-handed, and I know who you've blown it on. Don't come to see me again." "Look, what arrogance!" Diana curled her lips. "And this is my daughter talking to me. Your father, too, such a hero, gave his kidney to some guy. The whole town's talking about it. It's all over the social media. Obviously, it's a PR stunt. After that, he's probably making a lot of money. But that he kicked his wife out of the house and brought in a second family, the story doesn't tell. How do you like living with your new family? How do you like your brothers?" "They're normal brothers," Alice said, "and their mom is normal, even though she looks like a model, but she's homely, running around, looking at daddy's mouth. Maybe he originally needed such a one. Maybe your marriage was a mistake, and maybe I shouldn't have been born. Then Michael would have a father, and I'm nothing but trouble." If Diana had been an attentive mother, she would have noticed that her daughter was depressed, but she didn't care about Alice. She was frantically thinking about how to go on living, and on what? Without money, her lover would obviously kick her out. He had made that clear. Alice didn't care about her mother's worries either. With a loud slam of the car door, she jumped out and ran to catch up with her friends. She didn't want to go home. It was true that her father had a new family, and not that Alice had anything against them. She understood everything, because she was a grown-up girl, but it just became unusual in the house. Alice felt superfluous, and maybe not even in the house, maybe in this life. And everything seemed to be fine. Not so long ago, Alice was so happy when the kidney transplant operation on Michael was successful, and it became clear that the guy will live. John, who had donated his organ, was also feeling fine. He had already been discharged from the hospital. And with Michael, everything was more complicated. He was still lying, but, as the doctor said, was on the mend. And Alice found out through her father. Georgia did not let Alice near her son and forbade the girl to go near the hospital. "I am grateful to your father, but together with Michael you cannot be," said Georgia. "You bring only unhappiness." And Alice believed in these words. The girl actually began to feel that way. She sank into a severe depression. She didn't want to do anything at all, neither to go home, nor to go out with her friends. Why nothing, though? She wanted to be with Michael, but that was impossible. John was working in his office. Doctors, after discharge, strongly advised bed rest, but the man felt normal for a long time. He tried not to go to the office yet. He did things from home. The man did what he promised Diane he would do. Right after he kicked her out of the house, he brought his second family here, having talked to Alice beforehand. The boys were happy, and Kendall, their mom, was blowing John away. She never entered his office without knocking, afraid to disturb him while he was working. So now, there was a scraping at the massive door, and Kendall's head appeared. "John, Alice's friend is here to see you. She wants to talk to you. Would you like to come out to the living room, or should I bring her in here?" "Send her in here. There's probably boys walking around on their heads in the living room." "That's just the way it is," Kendall smiled. A couple minutes later, Alice's close friend, Alfia, entered Jonah's office. "Hello," she said with embarrassment. "Alice doesn't know about my visit to you, and you don't tell her or she'll be offended. I'm worried about her." "What's wrong, Alfia?" "I can see Alice is sad, but it's because of Michael. His mom won't let them see each other anymore. Alice will get sad and forget him." "Sad? Forgetful?" exclaimed Alfia. "I wouldn't call it that. Do you know that your daughter climbs to the roof of an unfinished high-rise and stares down for hours? What do you think she's thinking at that moment? I'm really scared for Alice. She's got it in her head that she's bringing misfortune to others, and she doesn't want to live without Michael. At first, I thought it was just a crush and she'd forget him, but it's not. Alice loves this guy, really loves him. We have to do something. I'm afraid for Alice." After the girl said that, John was worried. He didn't realize his daughter's feelings for Michael were so serious. Georgia took her son's things out of the hospital bedside table and put them neatly into bags. "Finally, we're coming home with you, son. I made you some pies with cabbage, just the way you like them," the woman chattered on. Michael was gloomy, and his mother knew why. Alice. From the very beginning, as soon as the boy came to his senses, Georgia had told him she wouldn't let him date Alice and told him why. "You want me dead? Go ahead. He've seen this girl. Step over your mother." These were the words with which the woman ended her speech. She was not affected even by the fact that John donated his kidney to Michael and the fact that the man opened a large money account in the name of her son. The money, by the way, the woman refused for a long time and was about to give it back to John. That's when their first serious conversation happened. "This is a small part of what I have to do for you. Steve gave his life, and I just gave a kidney. Of course, money won't bring your husband and father back to you, but Georgia, think about it. Wouldn't Steve have made that money if you were alive? And whose fault is he not? That's just it. I want Michael to get a college degree full-time and not work like he does now. And you, stop scrubbing floors in your hospital. It's time for a vacation. Michael will graduate, and if he has the brains, start his own business. He'll have some startup capital. Let me do at least that for you." Georgia thought long and hard. Then she got it out. "Okay, we'll take the money. Let Michael have a chance at a normal future. Not like mine. But I'm not gonna let him see Alice anyway." "That's your right," John shrugged, taking youthful relationships lightly. Georgia and her son walked out of the hospital gates, and Michael breathed in the fresh air he had missed in the hospital room. At that time, a huge SUV pulled up beside them. John jumped out of the car and grabbed the bags from Georgia's hands. "Get in the car and I'll give you a ride," he said. "We'll take the bus," Georgia stubbornly argued. The man, not listening to the objections, literally pushed them into his car. A little way from the hospital, he turned into the first parking lot he could find. He turned off the engine and half turned around to look at Michael in the back seat. "So, Michael, how do you feel about my daughter?" "I love her," he answered without a second thought. "I see," John stretched out. "Then why did you put up with your mom's ban?" Michael hesitated, then, lowering his eyes, mumbled, "I didn't." "What?" Georgia shrieked from the front seat. She, too, turned to look at her son. "What do you mean you haven't gotten over it?" "Michael, what are you talking about?" "Mom, look, all I can think about all the time is Alice. I understand, and I don't want to upset you, but I can't stop thinking about her. I was going to see Alice, to talk to her. If she's okay with our breakup, then well." "She hasn't," John shouted. "She's very much not okay with it. So much so that she's thinking of jumping off the roof. And I got that from a friend of hers." "Georgia, you're a reasonable adult. What are you doing? Let the young people decide their own fate. They're not to blame for our sins. The more we interfere with them now, the more they'll be drawn to each other." They'll run away if it's not their destiny, but we shouldn't decide that for them. If my daughter jumps off the roof, what then? Your Steve will have died for nothing, giving his life for her. Georgia, wake up. Georgia was almost crying. Why are you making a monster out of me? I reconsidered my attitude toward Alice when she wanted to give her kidney, but I'm afraid I have a crazy fear. Michael put his hand on his mother's shoulder and smiled. Don't be afraid, Mom. Everything is definitely going to be okay now. All the skeletons are out of the closets and only happiness lies ahead. A week later, two young people came to the cemetery, a guy and a girl. The girl had a huge bouquet of scarlet roses in her hands. Here he is, my dad, said the guy, stopping near one of the graves. A young man with an open, friendly face looked at the girl from the monument. Thank you, whispered Alice, placing the flowers on the grave. Thank you for my life and for Michael.